The wind ruffled his blonde hair, but the boy didn't even notice it. He stood at the gate of his village and looked with hatred at the place where he had been born and raised. He would give anything to leave no stone unturned from this place. His anger was transferred to the creature living inside him, and QB took a wild delight in such emotions. "What are you procrastinating for? We mustn't be seen, leave while there's still time," the wise fox whispered softly, prodding the blonde who seemed to have forgotten that he needed to hurry. "Are you sure everyone will believe it?" Doubt slipped into Naruto's voice. The boy couldn't go off being unsure if everything would go smoothly. Everyone had to believe he was dead or the plan would fail. "With your skill at creating special shadow clones and my chakra, no one will even hesitate," QB grinned. "Come on, don't waste any time, we should get going." "Alright." Uzumaki cast one last glance at Konoha and hurried away. "Still, why didn't you let me beat Kiba in the exam? Even a 5-year-old child could beat that fool, and I had to give in. I understand that we shouldn't shine, but still, Kiba isn't the right opponent." "You'll still have the opportunity to defeat that brat," snorted the fox. "We have better things to do, and the death of the Hokage is the best time for us to disappear. Everyone will think you're dead and won't be looking for you, and you'll have a great opportunity to start a new life under a different name, and no one will be scared away from you like a leper, they won't even know you're a Jinchuriki." There was common sense in the Biju's words, and Naruto agreed with Kyuubi wholeheartedly. The death of the Hokage and the turmoil in the city was just the right time for an orphan to die at the hands of his enemies. And why not, if the child happened to fall into the hands of ill-wishers? Who would leave a child witness alive, and a shinobi at that? But Uzumaki wasn't going to erase his past life. He remembered every moment, every word, every stone thrown in his direction. They all knew there was a beast inside of him, but they never told him about it. How cruel the people of Konoha were. But in time, they would regret everything and beg him in tears to spare their lives. "No, I don't want another life," the blonde Kyuubi said sharply. "For all these years, for the loneliness and their scornful looks. Oh, how I hate them all, and I won't rest until I've destroyed every one of them. But you're right now it's better to pretend to be someone else and train. I need the strength to destroy Konoha, I'm still very weak." "Did that Uchiha make you realize your worthlessness?" QB laughed. "He did a good job on you. But you're good too, you almost gave yourself away. Learn to keep your emotions in check and don't give us away again." "I know without you," Uzumaki waved it off. "And by the way, is this technique really going to work?" "I'm 100% sure of it," the fox said proudly. "They will almost forget you, only vague memories will remain, but nothing concrete, and even if they meet you face to face, they won't recognize you." They moved on in silence, under the cover of night, and even the yellow moon, hidden by black clouds, could not light their way. Where was this boy going? And why was there so much anger in his heart? Why did those blue eyes blaze with rage? He wasn't who he said he was, and now, having shed the mask of a fool, he could be himself. But it will not last long, soon he will put on a new mask and everything will go back to the old circle. And now he was leaving his village without a shred of regret. He had a long and difficult journey ahead of him, but he would come back, he would definitely come back for revenge. Chapter 1: The First Attack on Konoha and the Appearance of the Mysterious Fox. The full moon was shining over Konoha, its silver light illuminating almost every hidden corner of the village. Most of the villagers were already asleep, half of the awake ones were just getting ready for bed, and the remaining few were not going to sleep through the night. They were shinobi on assignment or on guard duty, as well as ninja who had just returned from a mission, and those who preferred to sit in bars and restaurants until dawn to drink a few shots of sake after a hard day, get drunk, or even spend all their money on entertainment and booze. This day was the starting point of someone's cunning and elaborate plan to destroy the village of Hidden Leaf. A cool breeze swayed the branches of the trees, making its own special music from the rustling of the leaves. The tall poplars cast long shadows, as did the buildings, but these shadows were not like the gloom of the night, they were like the light shadows of midday that could not conceal any mystery. Stray dogs sometimes howled at the moon, as if they sensed the misfortune about to befall the village. Cats wandered through the alleyways, looking for a treat or a small mouse that might have crawled out of its hiding place at such a time in search of food. "Stupid animal," hissed the man, whose silhouette was concealed in a dark hooded cloak with a hood over his head. His face was hidden beneath a white marble mask, shaped like a fox's face and decorated with red paint. Nothing would have betrayed his appearance had it not been for a small kitten, still foolish and unintelligent, who did not smell danger in the stranger, and who clung to his leg, begging for affection and love. The beautiful ball of fur meowed nastily, trying to draw attention to itself. The unknown man gritted his teeth, trying to contain his anger. He hadn't come here because of some kitten, he had come to take revenge on everyone living in this cursed village and kill everyone in the most painful way possible. They must all pay, everyone would get what they deserved. During his absence, it would seem that the village had only grown and the people had begun to live in peace and tranquility. But not his embittered heart, which was clawing for revenge. Oh yes, he just longed to destroy this happy place and revel in the screams of pain and despair, to see the fear in the eyes of the civilians and personally slit the throat of every shinobi who got in his way. "I thought you'd learn to control your emotions," the fox whispered with a chuckle, chuckling stupidly, which made the masked man even angrier. "Shut up, Kurama," he growled angrily, hiding his face, "or I'll take your carcass out of the cage and cut it into pretty ribbons." Kyubi no Yoko immediately quieted down, no longer intending to poke fun at the Jinchuriki who had lost control of himself, realizing that it wasn't a good idea to get under Uzumaki's arm now that he had let his emotions take over his heart again. Baekgitsune fed on this hatred like the most delicious dessert of all possible, so he decided not to interfere for now and enjoy these dark and sticky, the most vile of human feelings, emotions, which Naruto had a huge amount of, and it seemed that there was no end to them. The fox had never seen so much negative energy in any human before. The kitten, licking at the leg Jinchuriki as if sensed how the stranger smelled the devil's aura, absorbed in itself anger, hatred, rage, thirst for murder and meowed, pulled away, wanting to run away as far as possible from the man who hid his face. But Uzumaki wasn't ready to let go of his victim, even one so tiny and innocent. With a heavy boot he stepped on the fragile body, and immediately there was a pitiful meow and the crunching of raw bones. Blood spurted and, lifting his foot, Naruto was satisfied with himself, convinced that he had crushed the skull of the tiny creature, and now the bloody mess lay on the ground. The death of an innocent animal did not bring comfort, but it excited him, and Uzumaki was already eager to kill the man. He had chosen his first victim and he needed to find it, but before he took the life of the first on the list, Naruto had to make a grand appearance so that Konohagakure would remember it for a long time and the villagers would be filled with indescribable fear, so that they would live every day in anticipation of danger, shaking before going to bed. "Kurama, which building do you think we should destroy first?" turned the Jinchuriki to his Biju, still, taking mercy on the fox. "The academy," Kyubi exhaled sweetly, already anticipating the attack and destruction of Konoha. "It's the one you hate most in the world, so let's level it." "You're right," Uzumaki agreed, "I hate the academy more than anything, so let's destroy it. It's a shame it's empty now, but it's a start." In the blink of an eye, the masked man vanished, as if he had never stood there, and only the innocent victim was a reminder that a few minutes ago, the villain who had so cruelly treated the little girl was standing there. Konoha's shinobi were not expecting an attack, so when a rumbling sound was heard and a scarlet glow appeared in the sky, not heralding the dawn, but indicating a burning building and dark acrid smoke rising into the sky. Many rushed to the scene of the fire, not yet knowing the cause of the fire and trying to extinguish the burning building. Those shinobi who had already gone to sleep were awakened, and in a flash, they were dressed and rushing towards the academy, which was engulfed in flames. Tongues of flame seemed to be eating the walls and its color was orange-red, in some places reaching absurd black. The first to arrive were Neji Hyuga, Tenten, and Genma, who had been awake at the time, who arrived just in time to catch sight of an unknown man standing on the roof, covered in a dark robe and hiding his face behind a mask. The unknown man was not afraid of the fire, and it seemed that it did not even touch him. The three people present were enough for the stranger, as it turned out. Now he needed to get his message to the Hokage, and these three would be sure to report the masked man. He proclaimed loudly so that everyone could hear and accurately hear his every word. I have returned then to destroy Konoha and take revenge on all the people of this rotten village. Soon Konohagakure will fall, and every inhabitant will be killed by me. The man in the fox mask said nothing more, he simply vanished without leaving a trace of himself, and the flames only grew more intense as they consumed and destroyed the Shinobi Academy. The other ninja arrived as well. Most of them began to work on extinguishing the fire, while a small squad was sent to search for the unknown. The appearance of the enemy near Konoha alarmed everyone. Meanwhile, Naruto Uzumaki was stealthily making his way in search of his victim. Now that half the village was on their ears, he had to be as careful as possible to stay out of sight, and besides, the blonde had his own plans for the rest of his time in Konoha. Why him? And why now? The mere introduction is enough to make these fools afraid. The seal isn't complete, and you can't waste too much chakra right now. Naruto, save your scheme for later, we'll still kill them all, who cares if it's a day sooner, a day later, Kyuubi discouraged the blonde man. I don't want to wait, Uzumaki growled angrily at the Biju. And in general, Kurama, no one asked for your advice, so keep quiet and spare me the pointless lectures. I know without you how much chakra I can use and how much I shouldn't. And I can't let him live, he has to die first, because he was the last one I fought. Naruto, don't be stupid. You disobeyed me and didn't wait 3 days for the seal to be completed, you said we would only attack the village and let them know about us, there was no talk of a fight. You could lose if the chakra gets out of control or else. The Biju didn't finish. With a hiss, he bounced as far away from the cage as he could because the bars were starting to tilt. On the other side, an angry Uzumaki appeared behind the iron gate. There it was, Kyuubi no Yoko, and he regretted driving his Jinchuriki into a frenzy. It was the most unpleasant, because being in the cage, the fox could not do anything to this boy, because he was restrained by the prison and chakra was limited, but Uzumaki could do anything he could think of and Baekgitsu knew it on his own skin. I just don't want you to ruin both of us, the Biju said looking him in the face. Until the seal is complete, your death will mean my death, and I'm not going to die because of your stupidity. Naruto's eyes changed color from sky blue to blood red, and the blonde walked over to the bars and grasped one of the bars, causing it to turn black. The little foxes must sit quietly and keep quiet until they are allowed to speak. Kyuubi bristled and clenched his powerful jaw, but he made no foolish attempt to attack and swallowed the sarcastic reply. Over the years, the fox had experienced firsthand how angry his Jinchuriki could be, and the power-strapped Biju could only tolerate the brat's antics. Obedient little beast, Uzumaki grinned, moving away from the bars and they instantly cooled. Now remember, I'm going to kill this puppy, and you're not going to get in my way, understand? Kyuubi didn't say anything, he only showed his fangs resentfully, growling softly. That meant he didn't care. Kurama, you're unbearable sometimes, the blonde exhaled sadly, looking away, you make me do terrible things. I still hope we're friends. Fox was silent. He'd never seen such a friendship, but he was still attached to the Jinchuriki. Naruto was quite normal, and many of their desires matched. But when Uzumaki gave in to his emotions, he wanted to bite his head off. Still, Kyuubi preferred to keep his mouth shut so that he could remind his friend of everything. Naruto wasn't violent enough, but he wanted to be, and that was his mistake, because sometimes Uzumaki crossed a line that could cost him his life. Some things should not be touched, some feelings should not be awakened and some actions should not be done, because it forms the personality of any person. And Naruto was a mere pathetic mortal, a temporary vessel for Kyuubi, but Yoko was nothing more. But in this case, it was a question of who was using who. When Naruto disappeared from the fox's sight, Kyuubi decided to retreat into the darkness and not interfere in the stupid child's affairs. He would call him himself when he felt the need. Uzumaki didn't need his Biju's help yet and hurried stealthily towards the shinobi that he needed and whose death he craved so much. Jinchuriki could feel the chakra of his victim, and that victim was somewhere nearby. The ninja found himself, simply peeking out from the nearest corner of the house and nearly colliding nose to nose with the masked unknown. The Shatten was prepared for this encounter, Perhaps his mud had smelled Naruto beforehand and warned him, so the blonde had to dodge a kunai aimed right at his mask. The blonde crouched down, avoiding a direct hit, but the weapon was clutched in the Chunin's hand and he didn't look like he was going to let it go just yet. Naruto didn't want to fight with weapons or waste time on techniques at all. Too little time, too limited strength, and yes, his stupid desire was over the top, but it wasn't without meaning. Today he must kill the first one on his list. Uzumaki had long ago made a list of those he would kill in the order in which his victims would fall, so he had no time for caution. In 3 days, he could relax and already follow the plan, but right now he still acted a little rashly. But it was necessary. "Who are you?" a shinobi with 2 scarlet stripes on his cheeks shaped like fangs asked. "You don't need to know that, Kiba," Naruto grinned. The Shaden stepped back in surprise. He hadn't expected his enemy to know his name. Did they really know each other? Or did this type have information on the shinobi of the Hidden Leaf Village? More likely the latter than the former. "How do you know my name?" Inuzuka decided to ask after all. He asked not out of curiosity, but to give Akamaru time to transform into a second copy of himself. "Because your dog pisses me off." Uzumaki was behind the brown-haired man's back in a flash. But his target was not Kiba, but his dog, who had just taken human form, which was what Naruto had been waiting for, and he plunged the kunai deep into the copy of Kiba, in the heart area, knowing that he had hit the target. Akamaru, still in the form of his master, recoiled and fell, bleeding. Inuzuka didn't have time to react, much less protect his friend, and a desperate groan escaped his lips as his second copy collapsed dead, bleeding. It weakened his will and his ability to perceive his surroundings adequately. "You bastard," Kiba exclaimed angrily and hurled 2 shurikens at the unknown man, which his opponent easily dodged. He immediately disappeared from sight and appeared behind him, but no, he wasn't going to attack so meanly. Naruto yanked Inuzuka's shoulder sharply and plunged the kunai into his shoulder. But he missed. The blow should have been aimed at his neck, cutting the brown-haired man's throat. However, another man's shuriken was stuck in his own arm. Uzumaki looked in the direction of whoever had thrown that weapon. Neji, damn, he was just in the wrong place. With his abilities he could have stood up to Hyuga, but he could have taken a heavy toll, which he didn't want to do right now. Uzumaki threw a small bomb at his feet and it exploded, sending him and Kiba into a purple haze. But Naruto had no intention of letting his victim go. He grabbed the man by the scruff of the neck and moved with him to another place, not far from where they had been fighting, because he didn't have the strength to move the 2 of them, and a couple of extra minutes would allow him to finish what he had started. But Inuzuka wasn't about to give up. Armed with a kunai, he swung at him, forcing Naruto to pull away. "You will pay for Akamaru's death," the brown-haired man exclaimed. "No, you'll pay with your life," the blonde man said coldly, and the katana he was hiding under his oversized hoodie appeared in his hand. One blow of the sharp weapon, in which the Jinchuriki had channeled chakra, and the hand that held the kunai was severed at the wrist. Kiba cried out loudly, clutching his bloody hand to his chest, but that wasn't enough for Naruto. Now all that was left to do was rip open the belly and scalp. He could be satisfied with that. "We should leave, Kakashi's nearby," the fox whispered worriedly in his ear. "Damn, he's early," Uzumaki exclaimed, realizing that he clearly didn't have enough strength on his former teacher, but he swung, wanting to at least chop Inuzuka's head off. But Naruto didn't have time, because 5 kunai flew towards him and he had to fight them off. He was interrupted again, and this time by the blonde. Ino, oh yeah, he remembered her. "Well, it's a bad time, but no offense for getting caught." He grinned at her and disappeared from her view for seconds before appearing in front of her face, driving the katana to the hilt and piercing her liver. Ino cried out, collapsing in his arms and seemingly unconscious instantly. "Go away, there's no more time," QB shouted growlingly. "I got it," Uzumaki said grudgingly, and disappeared a split second before Hatake Kakashi and Maeda Guy were in the clearing, promising himself that next time he would kill those 2. The plan had gone a bit wrong as Naruto had hoped, but that was okay. The 2 would be dead before the next attack on Konoha. It would be possible to sneak into the village pretending to be a normal person, and they wouldn't be expecting the next attack during the day, although the guards could be beefed up. Still, Naruto had a bad feeling in his heart, because he hadn't had time to make his wish come true. Kyuubi was right, a day later, a day earlier, it didn't make a difference. Chapter 2, Meeting an Old Acquaintance. Hinata sat by her friend's bedside and watched his face with excitement in her heart. Kiba was asleep and that was even better. Tears came to her eyes, but Hyuga held on, trying to keep her spirits steady. What had happened during the night couldn't get out of her head. She hadn't seen her attacker, didn't know who had burned the school to the ground. Yes, the fire was so fierce it couldn't even be put out by water. No matter how hard they tried to put out those flames, it was all useless. Neji told her that the unknown man was wearing a dark hoodie and his face was hidden under the fox mask that Anbu usually wore. Who would attack a peaceful village and what exactly the unknown man wanted to do was a mystery. The girl sat by Kiba's bedside all night, with Ino unconscious in the next room. Her condition was much worse, but the mortal danger had passed, and now the girl was in no danger, although she would be able to come to her senses not so soon. The kunoichi looked at her teammate and had no idea how she would inform him that his loyal friend, his dog, was dead. Akamaru's death had hurt Hyuga herself, but the dog couldn't be saved, it died instantly. Inuzuka was still alive, he was only wounded deeply in the collarbone area and lost his right arm, the hand to be exact. It was impossible to regain the lost limb. It was horrible. Hinata might have succumbed to the feelings tormenting her heart and soul, but she wasn't alone in the ward. Kiba's sister Hana was there with her. The girl held herself firmly and courageously, not a single emotion reflected on her face. A solid mask of indifference. Shino was also here, but at dawn he left his friend's room, realizing that he could not help and decided to find out as much as possible about what had happened. The night's event had alarmed many, from shinobi to civilians of the village. There were no more casualties, but the fox, as the ninja dubbed him because of the mask he wore, promised to return and attack again. And now the village was unsettled, passers-by shuddered in fear at the sound of any noise. Konohagakure was in imminent danger and no one could predict where the next attack would come from. The Hokage, though concerned, was still able to assemble a special squad to investigate what had happened. The patrols in the village were strengthened, as it was unknown how the fox had gotten into Konoha, and there was even speculation that he had been living within the walls of the Hidden Leaf village for a long time. That's what was so alarming. Hinata, you should rest, you must be tired, the older Inuzuka addressed the girl in a colorless voice. Hyuga would have objected, she could have sat by her friend's bed until the next morning, but she realized that Hana wanted to be alone and maybe let her feelings out. Maybe she was holding back in front of the kunoichi. Hinata decided to stay out of the way and silently left without a word. She wouldn't have been able to find the right words. She glanced into Yamanaka's room, but didn't go in, remaining standing in the ajar doorway. A woman, the kunoichi's mother, was sitting beside Ino's bed, her face pale and her eyes red with tears. The woman had been through a lot of fears that night, as everyone had originally assumed that the kunoichi could not be saved and it was only by a miracle that she had managed to stay alive. Hyuga stood there for a few minutes, hesitating, and then turned and hurried away. She could, like Aburame, concentrate on finding information, but the shinobi was so depressed that she realized she would only be a nuisance to everyone. So the kunoichi decided to stay alone with her thoughts for at least an hour, gather her courage and then try to help. But not now, when she was so broken. Her feet led her to the park. Since many people were agitated now, she didn't meet any passers-by, and this loneliness that enveloped her in a thin cocoon was like a breath of fresh air, something she missed so much. An empty bench under a spreading poplar tree, whose branches hid from the bright sun, casting long shadows, was the very place where the girl could indulge in her own thoughts and think about everything that had happened during the day, as well as give free rein to her emotions. To think and draw some conclusions for herself. But she was not allowed to be alone with herself. Not 5 minutes later, the sound of approaching footsteps came to her ear. Hyuga woke up and looked in the direction of where the boy was walking. At first Hinata thought he was heading towards her, but why would he? The man was walking by and she was just making up extra stuff for herself. Her imagination was working properly now. Damn, she's looking pretty, the fox laughed snidely in his ear. Who? Naruto asked quietly, noticing a girl ahead, clearly a kunoichi, but not recognizing her. Her face looked familiar, and he could tell from her eyes that she belonged to the Hyuga clan. But did he know her? There was something about her. Familiar. That girl! Exclaimed the fox, starting to run around the cage with excitement. He liked the smell of this human woman terribly, because she was the complete opposite of Uzumaki. Remember, idiot, always tailing you, fainting all the time. She was head over heels in love with you. But I didn't remember her name. Hinata? Naruto asked in surprise, the image of the hesitant and timid girl immediately popping into his mind. If that was her, Kyuubi was right, she had gotten prettier, and not just prettier, but prettier. Uzumaki grinned and headed towards the girl. She had already noticed his approach and was looking at him with all her eyes. I wonder if she would remember him. The technique should work, so she shouldn't even have the thought that he was the one she loved so madly. Or maybe her heart will tell her. Interesting, very interesting. Decided to have some fun. Kyuubi scoffed at Yoko, but Naruto wasn't even listening. He had chosen a new target for himself, but no, he wasn't going to kill her, at least not yet. Naruto pondered whether to put on the mask she was in love with, the fool and the goody-goody, the fool and the ever-smiling idiot, or show her his real face. He didn't have much time to think, and when he stopped beside her, he shuddered when he heard a single word come out of her mouth that made his heart drop to his heels. Naruto. A soft, gentle, caressing voice entered his mind, shattering all the porcelain masks he was ready to pull over his face. And before her it was as if he found himself unarmed, defenseless. This unusual feeling filled the blonde's mind for the first time that he was indeed confused, at a loss for words. There was no way she was supposed to recognize him, just no way. They were silent for a couple of minutes, looking into each other's eyes, and Uzumaki didn't know what exactly Hyuga saw, but a slight blush appeared on her pale cheeks and she lowered her head, breaking the eye contact between them. I'm sorry, I mistook you for someone else, she said quietly. And that made her heart beat again. She didn't recognize him, so the danger was over. But still, did she feel it or what? That was something the blonde was going to think about later. Right now he had a lot to deal with. Sit to her. Sit down. Whispered excitedly in Bakegitsun's ear. I want to touch her. Damn, Uzumaki, aren't you attracted to her? The blonde only gritted his teeth. Mentally Kyuubi won't hear him, it's imperative to speak out loud, but Hinata shouldn't suspect anything. He had to be careful not to give himself away, and that Biju would get on his nerves if he didn't quench his thirst. Nothing, Naruto said casually, sitting down on the bench. Hyuga felt uneasy. At first she thought it was Naruto, she felt it with all her being, but she knew for sure that her lover was dead. The man she adored so much had died long ago, in her childhood, and there was no way this stranger could be him. But her heart was starting to ache and being around the guy was unbearable. And when he sat down next to her on the bench, she wanted to jump to her feet and rush away. There was something mesmerizingly familiar about him, but also something dark and dangerous lurked at the bottom of his blue eyes. Her intuition rang with danger, and at the same time told her that this was the safest place to be. Her own senses were confused, she was so startled that she forgot about Kiba for a moment. How could she ever forget about her friend and switch to such nonsense? The guy sat next to her silently, frowning at the sky, and he didn't seem to notice his roommate. There were a whole bunch of benches in the park, but for some reason he chose the one she occupied. And Hyuga also felt weakness in her whole body, as if something was sucking out her emotions and the world faded, losing all its colors and shades. Hinata couldn't explain this incomprehensible feeling, but she also didn't suspect a shinobi in her shop neighbor because she couldn't feel any chakra in him. It was just an ordinary person, a regular peaceful resident of Konoha or a temporary visitor. Still, the kunoichi was getting uncomfortable around him. What's your name? Breaking the silence, Naruto asked. But he didn't even glance in her direction. His gaze, as before, was fixed on the blue sky, where fluffy clouds floated by. Hyuga looked at the blond man in surprise. His disdain, his frown, it was repulsive, and even his good looks were becoming sinister, but her heart was drawn to this cold and seemingly embittered guy. Hinata, the girl didn't even recognize her own voice, so quiet, tender, gentle and devoted it sounded. It surprised the blonde, too. The girl managed to notice it in his quick facial expression. Uzumaki, on the other hand, was indeed surprised. She had only given her name. Why didn't she introduce herself fully? It was unclear whether she didn't want to talk about the fact that she belonged to one of the strongest clans in Konoha, which was clear from her eyes, or just because her eyes spoke a lot, she didn't give her last name, or maybe she was just confused. "What's your name?" She addressed him in a respectful manner, as if emphasizing that he was a stranger to her. "Well, it's kind of funny." Menma was the first name that came to Uzumaki's mind. He remembered the boy he'd met 2 years ago in Whirlpool Village, his angry gaze fixed on the man who'd killed his father, but was respected and honored in the village. This boy reminded him of himself. That was why Naruto had decided to introduce himself by that name. It suited his new look perfectly, though the blonde was natural now and he liked it that way. She seemed satisfied with the answer, glad that he wasn't Naruto after all, otherwise it would have been painful and too mean to accept such a gift from fate. "Did something happen here yesterday?" Uzumaki was now scrutinizing the perturbed beauty. "I arrived this morning, but the main gate was heavily guarded and I was thoroughly checked, though no one bothered to answer any of my questions." "Yes," Hyuga said in a depressed tone. "There was a fire yesterday, and the school burned down. We don't know anything yet, but it's under investigation. Either she's not telling the whole truth, or the residents weren't told about you and your warning," Kurama whispered in a friendly whisper, annoyed. "I hope there were no casualties." Though Uzumaki wishes otherwise, he needs to see her reaction. And, oh yeah, she's exactly what he expected to see. Hinata flinched, involuntarily cringing. Kiba. All her thoughts were now on her teammate and Ino, who were only miraculously alive or they would have been killed already. But she didn't like Uzumaki's tone, there wasn't a drop of hope in it, not even a pinch of sympathy, cold, indifferent. "No, luckily there were no casualties," Hinata replied. Her voice trembles, betraying the excitement that now overwhelms her. Her head begins to spin, and nausea comes up to her throat, her weakness increasing and making the kunoichi feel sick. She gets to her feet, but immediately staggers to her feet and falls. Uzumaki's reaction is good, instantaneous, but Hinata isn't in a state to appreciate it. She doesn't even feel the strong arms picking her up, keeping her from falling to the ground. Naruto doesn't realize it himself, he just reacted and that's it, a reflex. Kurama, the furious Jinchuriki hisses angrily, he knows for a fact that this is the work of his Biju's paws. "I'm sorry, but she's so delicious, not like you," Kyubi says as if to justify himself, but stopped sucking Hinata's emotions out of her. "It's not enough, but it has to be a little bit of everything." The shinobi is still conscious, her eyelashes fluttering in confusion, not even realizing what's happening around her or to her. A slight chill ran through her body and she felt hot, but Hinata didn't even notice it. Her head was ringing and her eyes were blurring, but she didn't lose consciousness. Naruto gently lowers the girl onto the bench and leans over her. No, he doesn't show her any care or tenderness, it's not in his plans to kill Hyuga, at least not until she's in his way. He doesn't remember anything bad from her, but if need be, her life will also serve his greater purpose. She would hardly refuse to die for the man she loved. Still, the fox is overdoing it, he shouldn't leave Hinata alone like this. If someone finds her, they'll suspect something wrong, and besides, she might have questions herself. But he had no time for the stupid girl, he had come to Konoha to find out the situation and, if possible, to choose and calculate the best time to kill Ino and Kiba. But now because of Hyuga, he had no choice but to bring her to her senses. She doesn't realize anything yet, you can do whatever you want with her, the Biju seduces him like the devil. That's too stupid, Uzumaki snorts, though dirty thoughts keep popping into his head. I'm not here for that, I have a greater purpose. 15 minutes will be enough for you, that temptation devil doesn't stop. She has such a figure. Wouldn't you like to squeeze her in your arms? She's so defenseless now, supple. All yours. Take her and use her. Kurama, shut up, the blonde bellowed and, miscalculating his strength, slapped the girl on the cheek with a loud smack. But it doesn't bring her to her senses, she continues to stare blankly in front of her. I know you well, don't contradict yourself, Kyubi doesn't calm down. She's yours, Naruto, only yours, and would gladly give herself to you if she only knew who you were. Uzumaki grits his teeth, trying not to lose his temper. He slaps Hyuga's cheek again and her gaze changes, becoming more meaningful. Well, at least something. The blonde starts to slow her down, repeating the kunoichi's name softly. When Hinata comes to her senses, she sits up abruptly and moves away from Naruto on the edge of the bench, looking at him with a frightened and incomprehensible look, her cheeks burning, though she doesn't understand why. Her mind is blank, and she puts it down to fatigue and sunstroke. Still, a ninja needs rest. Are you okay? Asks Uzumaki, but his voice is cold and there is no interest in Hinata's well-being. I'm fine now, thanks, Hyuga blushes. She's a little embarrassed and ashamed of what happened. Still, she's a Konoha shinobi and should be more resilient. Maybe I should walk you to the hospital. Naruto suggests. It's a good cover for finding out what rooms his victims are in. No, I don't think so, the kunoichi shakes her head negatively. Naruto is angry, but doesn't show it. Stupid girl, she could have made it easier for him. Alright then, he turns around and tosses a farewell, I'll see you around, Hinata. Hyuga stares back at him confused, but can't get anything out of her mouth. Chapter 3, an old photo. If you do something like that again, I'll have you in ribbons, Naruto growled angrily, staring at his reflection. Damn it, the process was already underway, and he didn't have the energy to prevent it. This is bad, really bad. This isn't going at all the way he had hoped. Don't take it out on me when you can't control your own emotions, Kyubi grinned. And anyway, I don't understand why you're still fooling around the village. Do you want to meet that girl again? Uzumaki turned away from the mirror and walked over to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly and looking out at Konoha at night. As he had expected, his former place of residence was not inhabited by anyone, especially the area was now considered unfavorable for living. Only a couple of families, mostly some elderly people, decided not to leave their homes. This is the perfect place for a temporary headquarters. No one would poke their noses in here, and it's more convenient to gather information behind enemy lines without them even suspecting anything. Funny, he'd met so many familiar faces today, and no one even suspected Naruto. Just her. And that was worrying. And she herself was scared, calling him by his old name, and she certainly wouldn't tell anyone about it. He could take her out, but killing her unnecessarily would draw more attention to security, and he still had to think of retreat moves. No, Naruto wasn't going to destroy Konoha in one night, a week, a month or a year of his tyranny, his surprise attacks and assaults to make the residents shake with fear. That would be his revenge, and anyone could die at any time. Uzumaki turned around, looking at his old apartment. It was clean now, so it didn't take long to clean. But he wasn't going to sit idly by, and it was too dangerous to train in this place. Still, there was something that was bothering him, and it wasn't Hyuga Hinata. He could kill Kiba and Ino already today, even though there were relatives near their beds at all times. The victims of his attack yesterday clearly had spies attached to them, just in case he wanted to finish them off. That would be smart. And that clever idea could have come from none other than Nara Shikamaru. He was worth taking out, but not now, but when Naruto had more power to kill. Naruto, what are you going to do next? Kyubi no Yoko asked in complete seriousness. Wait at least 2 days, and then the seal will be ready and we can make another attack, and then retreat, to the forest. I know a place to hide, answered Uzumaki simply, but immediately added, but now I need to kill 3 people. 3. Bakegitsun wondered. Are you really going to kill that pretty girl too? Hinata. No, not her, the blonde shook his head negatively, as if his interlocutor could see his gesture. One very smart guy in Konoha. He's getting in the way. The fox said nothing more, his curiosity satisfied. Still, he had his own special plan that was very different from his Jinchuriki's, but Kyuubi wasn't going to tell Uzumaki about it, so the blonde wouldn't interfere with it. Kurama, tell me. Naruto fell silent, hesitating for a moment, and then continued. Why is it so necessary for you that I make physical contact with women? To get pleasure, the fox replied with a chuckle, but Naruto sensed a lie in the Biju's words. Well, if he didn't want to, then he might as well not say it, there was nothing dangerous about it and there couldn't be. Uzumaki moved away from the window and picked up an old scroll from the table, he opened it and began to study it carefully. It was very well encrypted, and to read it, he had to spend a lot of time deciphering important information. Naruto had been studying this old scroll for 3 months now, which contained knowledge of a very powerful technique. And he hadn't even finished half of it yet. How much longer would it take to study it? Uzumaki sat over the dilapidated paper until 4 o'clock, and then went to bed. He needed to rest, especially when there was so little chakra in his body, so little that it was barely perceptible. But sleep was short-lived. As soon as the sky began to lighten in anticipation of dawn, the blonde woke up. Something continued to disturb him, and he couldn't yet figure out what it was. The fox was surprisingly quiet, and upon waking up he didn't give him the annoying, "Good morning, you're awake at last," or his favorite, "How long can you sleep?" He didn't like the quiet Kyuubi. Kurama, Naruto called out to the silent Biju, who wasn't used to the silence. But the fox didn't answer, and that alarmed Uzumaki even more. He closed his eyes and sank into his mind. Presenting himself in front of the cage behind which was Kyuubi no Yoko, Naruto found no one and called out several times for credibility. Kurama, 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 fuck. But the Jinchuriki was not honored with a response, only instead of a thick fog, a bright bloody haze that had lost its milky color flowed down his legs. Naruto couldn't imagine what it could mean, so he was confused and froze in place, not knowing whether to leave or wait for Baikitsune to appear. It took about 5 minutes before the fox emerged out of the darkness into the light. His fur was more red, as if it had absorbed blood, but he seemed a little smaller than usual. Uzumaki wrote it off to his imagination. Still, the look on his Biju was very haggard. Kyuubi lay down in front of the cage with his head down on his front paws and looked at the Jinchuriki without much interest, but he still didn't say a word. What's wrong? Uzumaki wasn't concerned, but a slight agitation could be felt in his body. Did something happen? The fox raised an eyebrow lazily. Your appearance. That. A half-smile slid across the fox's mouth. And this, my dear Naruto, is the aftermath of your seal. And that's not all that will happen to me. What will happen to you, I'm not talking about at all. The blonde didn't like that line. What could happen to him? And why hadn't that insolent face said something like that before? Although no, about something, yes spoke, but who would only listen? And what will become of me? Asked the Jinchuriki. The fox laughed, but it sounded more like the cough of a sick old man. No, what was going on with Kyuubi no Yoko was not normal at all, and since the seal was causing such changes to the Biju, would the Jinchuriki change his appearance as well? Would his hair turn red too? What's going to happen to him, to Naruto? The same thing that will happen to me, Baikitsune confirmed his guess, which only made the blonde man angrier. Damn you, Kurama, that's not an answer. Uzumaki exclaimed angrily, kicking one of the bars of the cage. Tell me immediately what's going to happen to me. Well, first of all, your appearance will change, I do not know how, but my skin has become brighter, you can see it yourself, calmly began to answer the Biju to his questions. Besides, you will feel like an old helpless old man, as if all your strength has been pulled out of you. It should last a couple of days, from 2 to 10, it's different for everyone. So don't think that in 2 days we'll be able to attack the village, you should be able to endure those agonizing days, and then the power will flow into you, it'll feel like your skin is being doused with boiling water. I don't know how long it lasts, it always feels like a long time to me. And then you'll feel great, you'll feel so incredibly light and strong and powerful that you'll think the agony you've been through was just a dream, a silly fantasy. I warned you, but you didn't listen, so now prepare yourself. Naruto shifted his eyebrows to the bridge of his nose, frowning. He'd heard something like that before, but he hadn't paid much attention to it. Now he felt uneasy. First of all, the whole plan was going down the drain, and secondly, would he be able to survive it all? Uzumaki came back to reality, getting out of bed and quickly dressing. He needed to take a walk and get some fresh air, as well as think and come up with a new plan of action. Leaping out the door, Naruto headed towards the morning Konoha. The sun was already beginning to peek out, slowly creeping into the sky, as if it wanted to take its rightful place and drown everything in its bright and warm rays. But it pissed the blonde man off. It pissed him off. The realization of what awaited him did not bring any joy, only irritated him even more, but there was nothing to be done about it. The choice had been made, the past could not be undone, there was only to accept everything. Naruto was in such a hurry and so absorbed in his own thoughts that he didn't even realize he'd bumped into someone. Careful, a disgruntled female voice mumbled, but so familiar. Naruto glanced at the pink-haired girl and automatically pulled on the goody-goody mask he always wore around her. Wow, he had once been attracted to her, and for what? But now she was arousing the opposite feelings in him, far from the innocent, childlike love Naruto had felt for the kunoichi. Oh, how Naruto hated her. Hated her for everything from her rejections to her blind love for the Uchiha. By the way, Sasuke. That's a different story. And now a disheveled Haruno was standing in front of him, looking at him intently and warily, as if waiting for some words. And Naruto didn't wait long, speaking with a fake smile. Oh, girl, I'm sorry, I was so preoccupied that I wasn't paying any attention to the road, so I crashed into you. I hope I didn't hurt you too much. Sakura, apparently satisfied with that answer, smiled back, but not warmly and sincerely, but rather strained. It's okay, I was thinking about it myself and didn't notice you. Could you at least tell me your name? Naruto asked. But he knew her name perfectly well, and even if he wanted to, he couldn't erase it from his memory. It sounded on his lips, poisoning his mind. A cursed name, for a cursed kunoichi who had only one thing in store for her, death. And that death would be at his hand. Haruno Sakura, the pink-haired girl, introduced herself, though it was obvious that she did so reluctantly. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I. He didn't have time to finish, as a man appeared at the end of the street, shouting loudly at the kunoichi. Naruto and Sakura turned together in that direction. Uzumaki took a step back unhappily. Kakashi was someone he'd better not cross paths with right now, or he might figure him out or suspect something wrong. Oh, well, since you're called, I won't get in the way, the blonde smiled stupidly, stepping back even further. All he needed now was to disappear from the copying ninja's sight. But wait, I don't know your name. Haruno turned to Naruto, a little confused. I'll name it the next time we meet. It was almost like a promise. Surely the next time they met she would find out who he was. Turning around, Uzumaki hurried away with a quick step. What, scared of Kakashi? Came the voice of the fox. Naruto remained silent. Sakura was still close and could hear him speak, and he didn't need that. Besides, Kyuubi was too silent in the morning, and this silence was like the loneliness he had been trying so hard to escape for so many years. Naruto didn't understand why he was out this early. After all, it wasn't safe and he might draw too much attention to himself, possibly leading to suspicion. He should be keeping a low profile and sitting like a mouse right now, but the four walls and the silence of the biju was killing him more than anything. Naruto needed people, passers-by, walking through a crowd of whom you didn't feel like you were alone. And it was infuriating, terribly infuriating. To the right, Kyuubi prompted, but Yoko and Naruto obediently obeyed, turning in the indicated direction. He didn't even think about it, he just followed the indicated route and that was it. The thoughts in his head were scrappy and not fully formed. He was only getting confused by them. Naruto must come up with another plan, otherwise this new attack was a fool's errand, not worth a dime. Why was it worth making himself known when he was so helpless and didn't yet have the power that should help him destroy an entire village? Left, the fox once again gave the desired direction and Naruto obeyed. He froze in surprise as he noticed a familiar figure ahead of him. Damn Kurama, 100% was going for her scent. Why did he like her so much? He didn't usually show any interest in people, but this one. But Naruto was already heading towards the girl, trying to anticipate her reaction. She was alone, and there were no passers-by, and this was a sparsely populated area, so she must have decided to take a shortcut. But why was she awake this early? The brunette stopped, pulling some paper out of her pocket and looking at it closely. Uzumaki became curious, and the blonde stealthily crept up to his victim, almost up close, and quietly exhaled into the back of her head. Hinata. Hyuga flinched, turning around sharply and almost falling. The photo fell out of her hands, but no one paid any attention to it as it fell downwards. The girl's eyes widened in fright. She clearly didn't expect to see anything here, much less him. Uzumaki didn't bother putting on his mask, it was easier to be himself. Menma, it's you, she said, still addressing him respectfully, coldly emphasizing that they were strangers to each other. I scared you, Uzumaki grinned, clearly pleased with himself. The girl didn't respond to the remark. Her gaze drifted down to the photo that lay on the cold ground, and she crouched down, about to pick up the important thing, but she didn't have time. Naruto took the photo in front of the kunoichi, deliberately touching her hand with his palm, causing a faint blush on her pale cheeks. They both straightened up. You dropped it. Naruto held the picture out to her, the image toward him, and shuddered. It was of him, only he was 11 and Naruto remembered exactly how the picture had been taken at school. He looked at the brunette perplexed, not even knowing what to think. Had she suspected something and decided to find out if there was any connection between Menma and Naruto? It was dangerous, too dangerous. If she guessed everything, he would kill her and immediately. It all depended on her answer. But Hyuga said nothing, just snatched the photo out of his hands and hid it in her pocket. She clearly wasn't going to make excuses and it was making Naruto nervous. One word from her and she was dead. But the girl was silent and her silence encouraged him to take drastic measures. This photo. Uzumaki hesitantly began, pushing the girl to talk. The blush on her cheeks grew brighter and her eyes glittered fearfully, as if he had learned her biggest secret. It's Naruto. Hyuga finally explained. Remember when I called you by his name the first time we met? He's dead. It's been, enough time has passed since his death. She won't recognize you as you. I did my best, came Kyuubi's reply. And that calmed things down. Naruto was already ready to take her life in one move, quick and crisp. Naruto. Did you care for him? Though it was a question he shouldn't have asked, Uzumaki was eager to hear about himself again. Yes, Hyuga didn't hold back. Will you tell me about him? For some reason, the request came off his lips before he could comprehend it. Hinata hesitated, lowering her gaze uncertainly. She didn't know Menma at all, after all, and to confide in him. Could she trust a stranger, much less a guy? Would she be able to open her heart to him? What if he laughed at her feelings? He was the best, was the only thing she said. She didn't need any other words, because to her, he really was the best. Was he the reason you were crying? Naruto asks, noticing her red eyes. The kunoichi flinched, she hadn't expected such a question. Did it really show that she was crying so bitterly just a few minutes ago? No, it's just that my friend is in the hospital. She doesn't know why she's telling the truth, just because it feels right. A bad man attacked him and hurt him badly. Kiba just woke up today and he feels so bad. I'm willing to do anything for him, but I don't even know what to do. Naruto. Kurama's voice is angry, growling, let's kill the bastard. And Naruto agrees with him wholeheartedly. Now he has one more reason to kill Inuzuka. And Kiba won't live to see lunch. Chapter 4, Are You Alone? They were ready, and the only thing that united them at the moment and made their bond stronger was the lust for killing. And they were willing to go as far as it might take, but obligated to kill this bastard that was causing such dark and rotten feelings in their souls, destroying reason and strong will. Kill, destroy. And it did not take them long to do so. The girl was the last person to see them, or rather him, Uzumaki Naruto, who had taken on a new name, and that name was Menma. And now, the blonde man, hiding around the corner disappeared from sight, running past the dogs and cats sitting on the fence. He was able to reach his hiding place in a matter of seconds, but he didn't need much chakra for this technique, because he didn't use his own strength, but the foxes, sealed inside him. The Balakan and mask were waiting for the Jinchuriki to put them on again, so he didn't have to spend much time on changing. The question was different: what exactly was the best way to kill the shinobi? Naruto decided that it was better not to take his katana with him this time and limited himself to a single senbon. The long and sharp needle fit perfectly in the palm of his hand. Still, common sense reminded him of himself. Naruto realized he couldn't shine. Just one seal, his fingers memorizing the movements by heart, and he was not far from the hospital. Hiding in the foliage of the trees and waiting. That's their plan. I'll find him and you save up some chakra. We still need to leave discreetly as well, the Biju instructs, and this time Naruto obeys, ready to rely completely on Kyubi. Closing his eyes, Uzumaki concentrates fully on his chakra. He will need to use some for the senbon and also to get back, but he also needs to leave at least a drop for any unexpected eventuality. There's not enough chakra, too little, the seal is sucking all it can out of him, but that's okay, when it's done it'll come back in triple the amount. Second floor, fourth window on the left, Kurama found the target they needed rather quickly. Okay. The blonde nodded, twirling the senbon in front of his eyes and letting some chakra flow into it before closing his eyes. I'm ready. Uzumaki's hand rose, guided by the Biju, and launched the sharp arrow along the desired trajectory. It was fast, nimble, elusive. Naruto quickly folded the seal and was back in his room. He didn't need to be convinced, he already knew that the senbon, with the amount of chakra he'd put into it, would have no problem penetrating the wall and going straight into his head. Kyubi, but Yoko is never wrong in her calculations. Kiba is dead. That's a pretty quick death for a bastard like that. But it doesn't matter, he's eliminated his first victim and biggest threat. She'll cry, the fox says suddenly, and for a moment Naruto clearly envisions a crying Hyuga, but immediately shoves the thought and image away. Bad thoughts. That's not what he should be thinking about, but something else entirely. He should be preparing for the destruction of Konoha, trying to come up with a proper plan, not going from extreme to extreme. And that seal. It's time to do something about it. I think Naruto stops talking. What does he think? Nothing, no thoughts in his head. He had killed Kiba, but he felt no joy, only a cold calm. Like he'd done what he had to do. That's all. Uzumaki took off his hoodie and mask, hiding them, and, sinking down on the bed, closed his eyes, immersing himself in his inner world. He was going to have to talk to Kurama. It should have at least calmed him down, or given him some thoughts. But this time there was something wrong, and looking at the fox, Naruto was very surprised. Is something bothering you? Without much interest, Kyubi asked Yoko, lying in his favorite position. Your hair, was all Uzumaki could squeeze out. The fox only grinned. Indeed, his fur had darkened to a dark brown color in some places very close to black. I'm not the only one, Kurama admonished him. Naruto didn't understand the Biju. Taking a couple steps back and squatting down, the blonde began to stare at his reflection in the murky water. There were black strands in some places, but they were chaotically arranged all over his head. And yet he wasn't pure blonde now, and it was obvious. Why? What had happened? What was causing his hair to start changing color? How long would it last? It's the seal, Baekgitsune explained as if reading his thoughts. We took someone's life, our souls turn black and it affects our appearance. The more you kill, the more your appearance will change. Mine, by the way, is completely dependent on yours, our bond is strong. Biju's words didn't please the Jinchuriki one bit. Okay, looks, what does he have to lose? It's not a big deal if he stops being blonde. But what was happening to his soul made him wonder. It made him wonder if he needed it. Uzumaki sneered. It was Hinata, she had softened him, even a couple minutes with her was enough to make him start to think about his own choices. Naruto straightened up and crossed his arms over his chest. He was about to have a very serious conversation and a lot would depend on the fox's honesty. Kurama, Uzumaki began, staring intently at Taiketsun. We need to settle something. What? The Kyuubi asked lazily, not even glancing in Naruto's direction. Hinata, one name that could explain a lot and confuse at the same time. There was silence for a couple minutes. Uzumaki waited for an answer, as if it could explain a lot. The nine-tailed one was staring thoughtfully in front of him and it was unclear what he was thinking now. That girl. Kyuubi didn't seem interested in this conversation. The girl you keep talking about and bringing me to, Uzumaki mouthed every word. Why do you want her? I liked her, he replied, so simple and unusual for a Biju. In what way? You mean you like the person? How stupid is that? Let me put it another way, what are you going to do with her? I liked her, Baekgitsune repeated, and then, after a couple minutes of silence, added. It's delicious. As if that could explain anything. Naruto didn't like that answer. He wasn't happy at all that the fox was showing interest in anyone. It was kind of like jealousy when your brother feeds candy to the neighbor's kid. Something like that. And Naruto wasn't about to share his Biju with Hyuga. Why would she want it? I've decided to kill her, Uzumaki said quite seriously. Go ahead, the fox did not even discourage, only when the seal begins to act on you, and I will not be able to feed on your emotions, because they will be almost non-existent. I will suck all the life out of you, because the girl I can feed on, you killed. Baekgitsune's words made one wary. Should Hinata be killed? Kyuubi but Yoko needs food because any creature needs to feed and apparently Hyuga could, like him, feed it. Still, killing her now is very stupid. We need to get close to her so that when the fox is hungry, he can come to her quietly. But what would be a good idea? Hinata once loved Naruto, can she love him? Still, he is Naruto, though now he will appear before her in his true form. Will she accept him for who he is? Well, before the seal begins to take effect, we can try to make solid contact with her, Uzumaki said reluctantly. He didn't particularly like the idea, but it couldn't be helped. That's a great idea, the fox nodded encouragingly. You should take care of the scroll for now, and we'll find her later on in the evening. It's easy for a woman to be tied down when she's looking for comfort, and the death of a friend would be a big blow to her. Naruto listened to Kurama in silence and left his inner world. He sat down at the scroll again and sat over it until 6 in the evening, deciphering the old recording. The only time he was distracted was when his stomach rumbled. The blonde was incredibly hungry. One place came to his mind, a place where he had spent a lot of his childhood. It was a place he had warm memories of. Naruto didn't tell Kurama exactly where he was going or for what purpose. He left his apartment and in about 15 minutes he was already near Ichiraku Ramen. The place hadn't changed at all, except that the owner had aged a bit. Hey, old man, I'd like some ramen, I almost said, the usual, but added simply, with pork. The man looked at the customer and smiled at him. 5 minutes and a delicious dinner was ready. Strange, he hadn't even had breakfast or lunch today. But he had 4 bowls of his favorite ramen for dinner. Yes, the kind of ramen they make in Konoha is like no other. Afterwards, Uzumaki went in search of Hyuga. His mood was great, and the fox was whispering the right direction in his ear. The girl needed attention and care. Well, he would provide her with all of that and comfort the poor girl. Hinata was in the park, on the same bench where they had first met, after a long separation, and where their second meeting had taken place. How symbolic it was. Did she realize that she had come to the same place, or had she sat there deliberately, as if hoping for a new meeting? Still, she was alone and it was free to approach her. There were no passers-by, probably frightened off even more by the news of the shinobi's death. It was for the best, let them be afraid. Hyuga sat leaning forward, fingers drawing something in the sand. Her face wasn't visible, but Uzumaki was pretty sure she was crying. He stopped beside her silently, she noticed his feet and, quickly wiping the tears from her cheeks, raised her head. There was no surprise in her gaze, it was as if she had been expecting him to come, or hoping for it. The kunoichi moved to the side as if inviting him to sit down. Too pale, with red eyes and that kind of sad look that made Naruto feel something unpleasant stirring in his soul. He didn't like that. Ask her what's wrong, Kyubi prompted, or rather, spurred him into action. Ah. Hinata, I saw you this morning. Uzumaki didn't even know how to continue the conversation. And now, you're like, did something happen? Kiba died. She said it in a calm voice, as if this common phrase that didn't carry any special meaning had nothing to do with her condition, and then added, my friend died. Naruto bit his lip. He was expecting hysterics, tears, screaming, and here. So calm. There were tears running down her cheeks, and only tears. She carried the pain silently, as if she didn't want to let it out. Her feelings were raging, Naruto could feel it, but it was as if she didn't want to let it all out. She didn't want to share it with anyone. I'm so sorry. There wasn't a trace of pity in his voice, but he had to say it. It just seemed natural. He died this morning, he was murdered. In a rather unusual way. Her voice trembled, but she kept her composure. It was a plus that she was making contact and telling him what had happened. Right off the top of my head. It's so strange. Because he'd been through so much shock, the attack, he'd obviously been tried to kill him and I was never there to support him. I wasn't there for him. Hyuga sobbed, pressing her hands to her face, choking on her own emotions, but not letting them out, as if storing them up, hurting herself as much as possible. Punishing herself that way. Naruto sat silently for a couple of minutes, and then moved in, taking her into his arms and stroking her back gently. It's not your fault, no one could have predicted this, Uzumaki said quietly, trying to calm her down a little. There was nothing you could have done anyway. Don't blame yourself. Hyuga sobbed, clutched at his sweater and sobbed, letting all her pain out. She wasn't embarrassed by the closeness or the embrace. She was in pain. So much pain that her heart clenched and stabbed, her insides raging, turning upside down. She was roaring, sobbing loudly, sniffling and already rolling in her silent hysterics, gasping for air. Naruto was cheering her up, at least trying to do so, and she was roaring so hard it was scary. Uzumaki's heart snapped too, but not from Inuzuka's death, but from her bitter tears, her desperate cries. How much did she care for Kiba? Had she loved him? Isn't that the kind of love one mourns for? And these thoughts choked Uzumaki, causing him pain. The pain he had endured for years, being rejected, lonely, forgotten. Hatred filled him and anger took over. He pulled the girl away from him, squeezing her fragile wrists with force, causing her to cry out in surprise, and dug a kiss into her lips. Hard, painful, agonizing. Hyuga froze, as if she didn't know what was happening, choking on the sobs that were bursting out, and now the sudden kiss was stopping the air from entering her lungs. There was nothing left for her to breathe. Hinata wanted to pull away, but Naruto only bit her lips, as if eager to share the oppressive pain that burned like a fierce flame in his chest. And it was all because of her. But she was in pain without him. The girl twitched, trying to pull away, and all she could do was break the murderous kiss. She tried to breathe as much air into herself as she could. But it was as if she couldn't, as if something was choking her, preventing oxygen from reaching her lungs, an invisible barrier. Hinata gulped air in small gulps, breathing heavily and wheezing. Her consciousness was on the verge of fainting, but the girl continued to keep her sanity. What have you done to her? Growled Kurama angrily in her ear. How the hell should I know? The blonde exclaimed confusedly and began trying to calm the girl down. Hinata was still breathing normally, but was now trying to keep her distance from Naruto, feeling threatened by him. She hadn't come to her senses yet and didn't fully realize that he had kissed her a few minutes ago. Hinata, Naruto didn't know how to explain his outburst and reached for the girl, but she only sat back to the very edge of the bench. No, she didn't want this closeness. She just didn't. Menma, I didn't expect this from you. Her voice shook and she rose to her feet, getting ready to leave. Please don't touch me again. But Uzumaki couldn't let her leave. No, not now. He jumped to his feet and enclosed the girl in a hug. Hyuga wanted to cry out, but her mouth was clamped shut with the palm of her hand. Hinata even forgot that she was a kunoichi and that she was stronger than a normal human. It all happened so suddenly, and her emotions were running high. Hinata, I can't let you go. Naruto whispered like a madman. Don't leave me, please. And Hyuga froze. She stopped lashing out, only her body trembled weakly in his arms. Naruto took his hand away from her mouth and hugged her, just enjoying her warmth. It felt good, a sense of lightness filling him. And he didn't need any revenge or other stupid goals. Menma, the girl spoke softly, her voice trembling with excitement, are you lonely? The question was so sharp and pointed that Naruto let go of the kunoichi's hands and recoiled from her as if she had burned him with her question. Lonely. Was he lonely? He hadn't been lonely for a long time and he didn't give a damn about anyone. Only to kill everyone and destroy them all. And I'm lonely. Hinata didn't wait for his answer, she just spoke. With the death of people I care about, I feel more and more alone in this world. When Naruto died, I lost the sun over my head. I fell into such despair and despondency, but Kiba pulled me out. And helped me learn to enjoy life and smile again. With his death, it's as if I've lost the sun I've worked so hard to gain. And now I'm alone, Menma. I'm afraid to get attached to people. The people who give me warmth, the people I begin to love with all my heart, die. I'm alone, Menma, I'm all alone. Please stay away from me. I'm afraid I'll get attached to you too. I'm cursed, Menma, cursed. So, just leave me alone. After such an unusual speech, Hyuga walked away. She didn't even take one last look at the blonde man. Naruto didn't dare to stop her. There was something about her speech. Catchy. He just watched Hinata walk away. Chapter 5. During the funeral. Since the morning, the sky was covered in gray clouds. A cold wind had picked up, and an unpleasant emptiness in his chest kept Uzumaki uneasy. He knew that Kiba's funeral was to be held today. The funeral of the bastard that Hinata had been so heartbroken for. Why did she care about him? Why had she cried for him? That lowly, miserable worm. How could she care for him? It made Naruto angry, and he clenched his fists in impotent anger because he was unable to control her feelings. He waited for the moment when Inuzuka's funeral would begin. It would be good when they would all gather in one place to honor their comrade. It gave great scope for the Jinchuriki's actions. The cloak was already on him, and the mask lay on the table, awaiting its finest hour. Kurama wisely preferred to keep silent, but he didn't care about Uzumaki. The seal had already begun to consume him. The feelings were disgusting, as if they were trying to skin him alive and turn his insides inside out. He wanted to whimper and dig and dig and dig in helplessness. Kyubi had already forgotten that feeling, But damn Mito, she was the first to do such a disgusting technique on him, though, and she had paid for it in time. The fox grinned, thinking back to his Jinchuriki. Oh yeah, he hated Mito, that Uzumaki was an insufferable bitch who wanted to bite his head off, her red hair still standing in front of his eyes. The vicious creature tried to build him up however she wanted. It was as if she wanted to command him, to be the mistress of a wild beast. And oh my, she had lived so many years, lived to a ripe old age, and died such a shameful death. Compared to her, Kushina was an angel. Oh yes, there was something about Kushina that attracted him. Yes, angry, yes temperamental, but at times she showed him affection, especially in moments when she felt very lonely. They got along well enough, though the girl didn't fully trust him, and yet, Kyubi no Yoko had been quite docile and obedient as long as Kushina had been all his. But then that damn Namikaze showed up. Burn in eternal flames for that bastard. He took his Kushina. This Biju couldn't forgive the fourth Hokage. He felt betrayed, which is why the moment Naruto was born he wanted to break free. And why didn't Kushina have a girl? The same beautiful girl with fiery hair and strong-willed character. Why did he have to put up with a snotty little boy he wanted to kill all the time? Although, Naruto is a lot better than Mito. But they'll never reach the kind of understanding that he and Kushina had. And yet, Bakgetsu noticed an attraction to him. An attraction to women. Not all of them, just a select few. There was something special about them, a tenderness. Kurama could feel their souls, penetrate their feelings, and he liked it. And he liked this beautiful little girl. Which Uzumaki himself seemed to like. She made him softer, healed and calmed him. Her presence was becoming as necessary as air. He needed her. And what he was going to do to her, Naruto wouldn't be able to do. That's why that foolish boy should not be privy to his plans. It's time, Uzumaki's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Naruto stepped away from the open window and returned to the table. His gaze slid over the half-opened scroll he was still unable to decipher and read, and then his hand reached for the mask. The porcelain burned his fingers cold, like the bite of a poisonous snake. He did evil and called it justice. It was a pathetic sort of revenge for an abused child, as Kyubi had dubbed it. The cold of the mask also burned his face, and the blonde didn't like it. It hadn't been like this before, but now the new feelings were causing an incomprehensible unease and anxiety. It's time, the Jinchuriki repeated again, as if regaining his confidence. He must be firm and unwavering, his hand must not waver. Getting to the hospital wasn't that difficult, even getting into the unconscious Kunoichi's room was easy. And so, standing over the sleeping Ino, Naruto gazed into the soft features of her face. He hadn't noticed before that she was more attractive than Sakura, even her body, more mature and perfect, though she was far from Hinata. Uzumaki crouched on the edge of the bed and reached out and gingerly touched her warm cheek. Ino. She wasn't kind to him, showing no care or concern. Neither was running around the Uchiha as if he were a god. What idiots and fools they are. What is their adored Sasuke now? He's now a Class S criminal and a member of the Akatsuki criminal organization. I wonder if he were here, would they be as nice to him? Would they give him their heart? Ha. That's an idea. What are you up to? Kurama's interested voice sounded in his head. The fox seemed to be curious as to why Naruto was slowing down and not rushing into a reprisal. He could also sense the blonde man's arousal. What had gone through that boy's mind was obviously not good. You don't find her attractive? Uzumaki asked the fox. You don't find her figure seductive? So you're looking at that one, but you don't want to notice that little girl. Kyubi snorted. He didn't like that girl, she was just a bitchy little bitch who wasn't worthy of his attention. Kurama didn't like that kind of girl and didn't even pay attention to them. Did Naruto really care about her? Or did he like her? Strange taste in that foolish boy. Can't appreciate a true woman at all. Why are you so fixated on Hinata? There was displeasure in the Jinchuriki's voice. Naruto, you just don't get it. She's capable of giving you so much more than those stupid chickens. That girl's body is gorgeous, what's not to like about her? And the shape. Her shape. But if you like them, how can I get in your way? Kurama grumbled unhappily. He had no desire to argue right now. For a couple of minutes, Uzumaki was silent. Pensive, he even forgot the reason for his visit, and then, as if remembering, he got up from the bed and leaned over Yamanaka. His cool fingers slid over her plump lips, so soft and sweet. He could play with her, but she was unconscious and the game threatened to get boring. In that case, he could think of something else to do. A kunai appeared in his hand. The cold weapon added to his craziness, intoxicating his mind, evoking incredible feelings. He swiped the tip across the soft skin, leaving a shallow wound. The smell of blood is unique. The most incredible of all possible smells. And Naruto had always believed that the smell of blood was the smell of death in any form. Naruto felt no desire to kill, but felt it was his duty. He plunged the kunai deep into her stomach and felt her body shudder. The kunoichi's breathing became heavy, her chest began to heave much more frequently, her body trembled. Naruto grinned. She was in pain, let her feel pain even in her dreams, they should all know his pain. Funny, she would never wake up like that, would she? Those who love her, who care about her, will obviously be waiting for the moment when the girl comes to her senses and her coma fades into a dead sleep. But that's not what's so important. What matters is that they will be overwhelmed by grief, grief will crush them. They would experience at least a fraction of the feelings he had to endure when he lived in that damned village. Anger began to rise in him, growing into blind rage. His fingers dug harder into the kunai and drove the hilt upward, making a huge cut. A deep gash ran from his navel to his collarbone. Naruto felt a surge of vigor and strength. Sweet intoxicating revenge, how blissful it was. Sometimes he didn't understand himself. But now all his actions were right, he thought. Naruto opened her chest with his hands. She was still alive, and if she were conscious, she would be squealing in pain and choking on her own blood by now. With a wild laugh he ripped the heart from her chest. So beautiful, so dead, she lay breathless and one would think she was asleep, but the ugly wound made it clear that she was not. Naruto once again burst into a mad fit of laughter. He felt the pleasure, the unquenchable desire to kill everyone again. Apparently he was heard, because the door opened and a short and overweight nurse entered the room. She didn't even have time to cry out, because Naruto's reaction was practiced to the point of automaticity. His kunai hit her in the forehead, and she fell dead, without making a sound, only emitting her last breath. Time to go, Kyuubi commanded, and the blonde listened to him. Biju was right, the deed was done, now it was just a matter of time. Still holding the warm heart in his hands, he carried to his apartment, where he removed the mask and laid it tiredly on the edge of the table. His bloody fingerprints remained on the porcelain. Ino's blood gave a special charm to the snow-white mask. Without removing his cloak, he settled exhaustedly on the floor, stretching his arm out in front of him and examining the human heart. He was not sure whether he would do what he had originally intended, but if the thought did not leave him, he would return to it later, but now, as if devastated, he did not know at all what to do. An hour or two later, after recovering and showering, he went to the park, hoping to catch Hinata there, but Hyuga never showed up. He sat on a bench for a couple hours and was about to leave the empty bench, but the fox exclaimed within him. She's coming, joyfully proclaimed the Biju, awaiting the arrival of his chosen one. Oh yes, he had grand plans for this little girl. Naruto grinned silently and stared in the direction of the approaching figure. Hyuga was clearly in no hurry. Clad in black, she slowly approached, staring blankly at her feet. Her swaying gait, her hands clasped to her chest, and her detachment from the rest of the world told him that she was very much affected by Inuzuka's death. I wonder if she's already aware of what became of Ino. How would she feel about the kunoichi's death? As the girl came closer, Naruto was finally able to get a good look at her. Her tight black skirt reached her knees, revealing her beautiful calves. Her thin black blouse with a high collar made her skin look pale. Unhappy and lost, she looked mesmerizing and magical. Uzumaki didn't have time to say anything, but as soon as she raised her crying eyes to him, all the words that were ready to fly off his tongue got stuck in his throat. She came close to him and her cool hands touched his cheeks very lightly. That light and incredibly gentle touch sent a shiver through his body. The girl leaned over and touched his forehead with her forehead, tears burning her pale skin. And so close, feeling her breath and her gaze full of pain and sorrow, Uzumaki couldn't utter a single word. Just to have her near, just to have her close and wanting to take away her pain. Menma, her lips trembled and her voice was quiet, almost inaudible. Please, Menma, tell me what to do next. Today. Ino was killed today at Kiba's funeral, she sobbed bitterly and her body shook. What's all this for us? Why these deaths? We're not at war, we haven't hurt anyone. Who's killing them and why? And how am I supposed to act? Maybe I'm next. Naruto didn't have an answer. He knew one thing, Hinata wasn't going to die, at least not now. She would be the person to share all his pain. She was the one he had chosen because when she suffered, Naruto remembered clearly, as if it was yesterday, all the humiliation and persecution. He remembers that oppressive feeling of injustice. Only her pain makes him remember his own pain. Whether Hinata deserved it or not, he never decided, but the others definitely deserved to die. Menma, her trembling voice seemed to penetrate his heart, tell me. What should I do? Uzumaki wanted to say, come with me. Yes, he wanted to take Hyuga with him, he wanted her by his side, but he had no right to reveal himself to her, and she wasn't so attached to his new image that she would follow him to the ends of the earth. Now, grief-stricken and agitated by the bitter news, the kunoichi might not have been fully aware of her actions and words. Most likely, unable to share her feelings and thoughts with anyone, she had chosen someone she didn't know at all to remind her of her favorite person. Hinata, his own voice sounded dull and quiet, his hands gently, as if afraid to scare the girl away, closed around her waist and he pulled Hyuga closer to him. They looked into each other's eyes, and it seemed to create a special bond between them. I know what pain is. I've lived with it all my life. It's not easy to let go, it's hard to let it 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 go. I know it's terrifying power, and the more you hold on to it, the more terrifying it becomes. If you want, I could take it away. Uzumaki never dared to say that the only cure for pain he knew was death, the death of the source of your pain or your own. It didn't matter so much. If she was willing to accept his help now, he would mercifully kill her. Quickly and without agony. Never mind Kyuubi and his plan, Naruto felt a special and strong bond between them now, so he was ready to give her freedom in this moment, because what awaited Konoha next would simply break her small and fragile heart. Will Hinata be able to survive the death of her loved ones? Will she be able to forgive him, or will she hate him forever? Or maybe she'll never know that he was the one who destroyed them all. Maybe he would let her live and be the only ray of light for her. The thought seemed so intoxicating and seductive, but so complicated and unrealistic. Thank you, her soft voice grew a little stronger, with determination. But I can't. It wouldn't be fair to Ino and Kiba if their deaths meant nothing to me. I have to feel it. It's the right thing to do. Naruto smiled. And she is strong, much stronger than he thought she was. Isn't that what attracted Kurama to her? Ah, that sly fox, he's been a little too quiet. What mischief was he up to this time? But Uzumaki didn't care about that right now. He had Hinata by his side, and he was experiencing exciting feelings around her. Will you forgive me for that time? Naruto opened his eyes in surprise. He knew he had said it. He heard his own voice, but he realized it wasn't his words. He hadn't meant to say anything like that, and it perplexed him so much that he almost listened to Hinata's answer. Plus, he realized and saw in her eyes that she too understood that it was an apology for the kiss. I understand you, Menma. She pulled away and her soft lips touched his forehead, giving him a warm and pleasant feeling. I'm lonely too, and sometimes that loneliness pushes us to do different things. If you feel lonely next time, if you want, I will take your loneliness away. Those words echoed in his head. Chapter 6. The Truth About Parents. This was simply unbearable. His hoarse breathing filled the silence of the room and he saw terrible things in the gloom of the night. The shadows seemed to take the form of terrible monsters with sharp claws and terrible fangs. They reached out their long paws to him as if trying to grab him. He sat on the floor, his palms resting on the cold wood. His whole body was cramping. An unknown force seemed to be turning his joints inside out. Chakra seemed to drain out of him, along with his life force, seeping through his fingers and going nowhere. Cold sweat dripped down his temples, face, neck, and back, making his skin clammy, making his clothes stick to his body. A heavy cough pierced him. It felt like he might cough up his insides. More and more saliva was coming out of his mouth, flowing to the corners of his lips, sliding down to his chin, falling to the floor. He felt sick, his skin felt like it was burning and it was like he was trying to peel it off. Something was choking him, there was less and less air, the oxygen was getting heavier and settling in his lungs, the coughing increased. There was an impenetrable darkness in front of his eyes. This darkness was so horrible and consuming that Naruto felt such incredible fear that his heart was pounding in his chest at a frantic speed. He didn't know what was going on with Kurama at the moment, nor did he care. Heavy wheezing echoed in his ears, and then a ringing silence and nothing. His ears began to rumble, his eardrums shuddered, and Naruto grabbed his ears, feeling something warm and sticky coming out of them. He immediately thought it was blood and shuddered in fear. To him blood was death. His head snapped up and he couldn't contain himself and screamed, but he couldn't hear his own voice. Uzumaki could not understand whether this agony lasted a couple of hours, minutes or weeks. It seemed that a destructive force touched him, wanting to split him into small atoms. When the world began to return in its colorful tones, an incredible relief came. Something seemed to flutter in his chest and Naruto felt an incredible freedom. It was so blissful that he lay on his back and stared up at the ceiling, watching the sun's rays slide across the cracked and sometimes fallen plaster. His sense of touch returned, 2. The floor beneath him was warm, it was his body heat that had warmed the wood so much. But the hearing did not return. The silence of this world was enchanting, along with it came something incredible about it. Naruto didn't want the noise to return, he didn't want to feel the hearing. Although, how could it be possible to feel hearing? Uzumaki couldn't understand it himself, but he was gaining something new in the silence. Yes, he needed the hearing for revenge, but right now he didn't need revenge either. Naruto felt alive, life was coming back into him. This incredible and powerful feeling of life was making him happy. Naruto felt his lips stretch into a smile, he knew he was laughing at this moment, but he couldn't hear his own laughter. He couldn't hear Kurama and he wasn't even upset, without the fox's voice in his head life seemed simpler. Maybe if he wasn't a Jinchuriki, life wouldn't seem like hell to him. The Biju living inside him. Isn't he dead? Hadn't Naruto found freedom from him? What exactly did he really want? He reached up to the ceiling and slowly clenched his hand into a fist, as if he wanted to scoop up air, life itself, with his fingers. It felt so good to be alive. An incomparable feeling. Naruto didn't know how long he lay there, feeling the strength building up in him. He couldn't feel any chakra, but life was flowing into him. I wonder if Kurama could survive this. There was no desire to go into his inner world. Let it be what it would be, but he didn't want to see that monster's smirk. This is just the beginning, Kyuubi's voice rang ominously in his ears, and his hearing returned to him with birdsong and the sound of wind. A suppressed groan escaped the blond man's lips. The world had returned fully with its rotting contents. How Naruto hated it and longed to destroy it. Feelings came over him and rage began to rise, unhinging his faulty system. How many more times would this last? When would he feel happy and free? When would he be able to find peace? And would it ever come? Naruto closed his eyes. He didn't want to go back to his own life. Uzumaki Naruto. He was gone, he had died 3 years ago. There should have been a bold end to that. But why did the peace of mind never come? Would only the destruction of Konoha give him a sense of freedom? It was like he was chained to this place, every breath a reminder that he belonged to this village. It was like a curse. Does Sasuke feel it too? And why did he choose Akatsuki? Naruto sat up, his body echoing with pain. He couldn't feel the power he had gained. Kurama had said as much, this was just the beginning. What was next for him? Would he be able to accomplish what he had set out to do? Can he destroy Konoha? He's not as strong as he thought he was. There are things in this world that are stronger than him, and Uzumaki is not immortal to fight injustice in this life. Naruto, you are now in the first stage of the seal, Baketsun's voice sounded in his head again. What will await you? Will be several times more intense and terrible. Pain, incredible pain will await you, and whether or not you can handle it is up to you. It doesn't matter how strong your will and fortitude is, it doesn't matter how much you crave revenge, it doesn't matter. There will be a certain moment, and in that moment everything will be decided, whether you will live or disintegrate into ashes. In that moment, you will be alone. I don't know when that moment will come or if you'll be ready for it, but if you don't have the right qualities to subdue the force, that force will crush you. I want to tell you something. I've never told you this. The only one I've talked about is Kushina. You've heard enough about your mother, but I think it's time you learned about who your father is. Uzumaki tensed up all over. He had never been interested in who his parents were. Kurama had told him about his mother a couple times. She was a Jinchuriki too, as the fox had said, beautiful, fiery-haired and green-eyed, a strong kunoichi. That was enough, because Naruto knew she had died in childbirth. She died to give him her life. He considered this woman a saint. A life for a life. It was a great price to pay. If his mother were alive, she would never have given him to the people of Konoha. But father, whether he was alive or dead was of no concern to Naruto. If he was dead, at least it would be much easier to bear his absence, but if that bastard was alive, Naruto would never, ever forgive him for that. And if Kurama wants to tell him about it, Naruto is ready to hear him out. The fox fell silent. He knew that the news about his father would be unpleasant for Naruto. He could even calculate his emotions and actions after receiving the information. For a very long time Baekgitsune had kept this information. For a very long time the shinobi who had taken his Kushina had troubled his soul. How Kyuubi no Yoko had longed to tell Naruto everything, and now the time had truly come. The nine-tailed fox demon needs Uzumaki to be in emotional instability. For the sake of it, he's even willing to disturb the ghosts of the past. Kushina. Kushina had an incredible character, strong, fierce, tireless, but could also be affectionate and gentle. She had known your father since childhood, but she never paid much attention to her own feelings, preferring to think of him as her rival in everything. They both had the same foolish and unbelievable dream. Each of them wished to become Hokage. Kyuubi fell silent thoughtfully. It was hard for him to remember Kushina, that sweet Kushina to whom he had been attached and who had dared to betray him. When he spoke again, his voice sounded dry and detached. They were both shinobi and quite outstanding. In his time your father was able to achieve his dream. He became the fourth Hokage. Yes, your father is Namikaze Minato, the yellow lightning of Konoha. Admittedly, he loved Kushina. I'll even admit the fact that he was a good head of the village, too good that he was willing to sacrifice his own son for Konoha. Kurama fell silent with a chuckle. Oh yes, this was exactly the sort of thing that would shake Naruto's inner world. When you were born, Kushina was in trouble. She couldn't bear the labor. They took too much of her strength. I could have killed her. My presence in her body became life-threatening and I left Kushina's body. She was melting before my eyes, and to tell you the truth, I was so furious that I attacked Konoha. For me it was only that damn village that was responsible for Kushina dying. Your mother was special to me, Naruto. Right now, Uzumaki would believe anything he said. Minato wanted to stop me. I was a threat to his beloved village and so he decided to seal me into you, still small and weak. This technique took all his strength and he died as soon as he finished the seal. The third Hokage knew that you were the son of the fourth Hokage, but he chose to hide this information from everyone, even you, but that didn't stop the villagers from knowing that you were my Jinchuriki. If only the third had been honest with you from the beginning, if the people had known that you were the son of their favorite Hokage, they would have treated you with respect and love. But Minato has made your life a living hell. You, his favorite son, he has subjected to ridicule and abuse. Your life is pain and you are destined to die with it. Kurama fell silent, feeling the blind hatred mixed with anger erupt in Naruto. Oh, he was incredibly angry. Baekgitsune had gotten what he wanted and now it was just a matter of time. He felt sorry for the boy, but he wasn't that attached to him, and he wasn't going to sacrifice his own skin for this stupid creature. And it didn't matter how much of what he said was truth and how much was a lie, his story was credible enough. Naruto stood up and it seemed that he could no longer feel the pain in his body. Feelings clouded his mind. He didn't bother to say anything to Kurama. He didn't need to. Right now he wanted to destroy and kill. The mask and cloak were back where he had left them. Donning his costume, Uzumaki walked over to the window. In the crimson glow of the sunset, the sky was beautiful. This might be the last night Konoha would see. Many would not make it to the dawn. The Hokage. The post is now held by one Tsunade. I wonder if she is as strong as she is said to be. Uzumaki disappeared, and the minute he did he found himself in front of the Hokage's building. The people nearby, as if they felt threatened, hurriedly left the street. Fools, what fools they are. A venomous smile appeared on the Jinchuriki's lips. Tonight Konoha would know his fury, feel his full wrath. He took a step towards that tall wooden building. How many memories had been associated with it and now it was going to fall at his feet, becoming ruins. The shinobi nearby noticed him and rushed towards him, pulling out kunai, shuriken, senbon and other weapons that could be useful in battle. Among those present Naruto spotted Tenten. He only recognized her by her hair. Although she had grown, her body was more flexible and graceful, her face had nice and feminine lines, she looked serious, she had two kunai in her hands that were about to fly off her arm. Come on, Tenten, what are you waiting for? It's not good to keep your opponent waiting, because if he gets bored, he might attack first. That's what Uzumaki did. In the blink of an eye he was behind the girl's back, katana already drawn, ready to pierce the kunoichi. One swing and the sharp blade sliced through the air. The kunoichi crouched sharply, putting her leg out and pulling it back, thus wanting to trip her up. Uzumaki was confused for a few moments. Usually his victims weren't so sharp and certainly didn't expect a stab in the back, but this one. As if she sensed or knew of his intentions. Naruto staggered, but did not fall, still keeping his balance. In the meantime the Shatten woman quickly got to her feet and turned to face him. In one hand she had a sickle, from the hilt of which stretched a long chain and ended in the free palm of the kunoichi. Is she really something to be feared? Who are you and what are you plotting against Konoha? Tenten asked loudly, waving the chain that had a sickle on the end of it. Uzumaki couldn't contain himself. He laughed out loud. His laughter seemed sinister even to himself. What could that pathetic girl do? And did he owe her anything? I wonder how loud she can scream. Well, my next victim will be you. With a grin on his lips, the blonde said and raised his hand at shoulder level. Quietly whispered the name of the technique. The next minute in his palm flashed a snow-white balloon filled with air. Uzumaki swung around and pointed it towards the girl. The ball easily and quickly flew from his palm, headed towards the kunoichi. The girl managed to deflect it, but it hit the shinobi behind her. That hit was fatal, and the man fell dead. Tenten looked behind her back and her lips curled. There was sadness in her eyes. What are you trying to accomplish? She shouted and launched a sickle in his direction, the chain of which was in her palm. Naruto raised his hand and a gust of wind blew out of it, capable of sweeping away everything in its path. But he was a little too late, and though the weapon deflected its path, it managed to hit his shoulder, leaving a deep cut. Naruto hissed in pain, clutching at the wound. He should be more careful with Tenten. After all, her style was weapon-based and she always had plenty of sharp objects in stock. The same trick wouldn't work on her twice, so she would be waiting for him behind her back. Naruto disappeared and appeared behind one of the shinobi and stabbed him through. The same fate awaited the other two. If he couldn't get close to her, he could destroy the ones who couldn't resist him and were just messing around. Naruto didn't expect to encounter any resistance, and he had almost no strength at all. As Naruto stood next to another shinobi, he felt a thin and sharp senbon enter his right shoulder. He shifted his gaze to Tenten. Surely this was only to her credit. Could she really be able to calculate his moves? The team she was on was always unusual, so the shinobi assembled in it were characterized by incredible abilities. What would happen when he met Lee or Neji? The two of them were going to be a lot of work. But still, right now, he must at least deal with Tenten. Her death would bring him some small peace of mind. I'm the one who will wipe this damn village into powder, Naruto shouted loudly, and the next second he was in front of the kunoichi's face. She had already brought her hand up with a sharp and long knife in it, but Uzumaki intercepted her wrist with one hand, and with the other he covered her eyes and quietly whispered the name of an old and dangerous technique that he wouldn't have dared to use before. Tenten twitched in his arms and began to slowly settle down. Naruto bounced off of her and in the next second she fell, crumbling to ashes. Naruto cried out quietly, grabbing his hand and feeling it go numb and his joints turn to ice as if they were freezing. He knew that the toll of this technique would not be pretty. It would be nice if he still had his arm, but if not, well, he would try to think of a way to get it back, but right now, numb to the elbow, it hung whip-like along his body. He couldn't feel her at all. The other shinobi arrived and Naruto realized that he was too slow. If he spent this much time on each of his enemies, it would take years to weed them all out. He owed it to himself to think of something more substantial and more reliable, but now, surrounded and taken in a circle by his enemies, he couldn't spend too much time thinking as a tall white-haired woman appeared among them. Here comes the Hokage herself, the fox said with a chuckle, but even without his clues Naruto realized that this was the great Goheim. And now he wanted to test just how strong this woman was. Chapter 7. A Girl Without Honor. Uzumaki felt rage flaring up in him with a fierce flame. This woman had become his greatest enemy and he would kill her no matter what. No matter how, he must do it. She stood before him so majestic that he wanted to pierce her with his blade. Oh, how badly Naruto longed to destroy this woman who protected this cursed village. Tsunade's gaze slid over the dead shinobi and her beautiful face reflected a vicious grin. Naruto could even feel the anger rising in her. He was so stunned by her overpowering chakra that he didn't notice the moment she lunged forward, and it was only when her heavy fist struck his chest that he felt himself being swept away in a violent wave. He flew off his feet, crashing backwards into the Hokage's wooden building, breaking through the wall and falling to the floor. The splinters dug into his skin unpleasantly. All the air had gone out of the blonde man the moment the great Godime had struck, and now, lying on his back, it was as if he couldn't breathe, as if something was in the way. His chest was burning, his head was ringing, and his whole body was cramping. How he had underestimated her. She was the Hokage, and her strength should exceed that of ordinary shinobi. Naruto got to his feet, and just in time, because the Hokage had already appeared in the hole, and Naruto miraculously managed to avoid the next blow, which broke through the floor, creating an incredibly deep hole in it. Uzumaki felt the huge difference in their strength. It was like he was a scared kitten in front of a predatory lioness. And yet she could easily beat the life out of him. The thought of revenge wasn't so sweet now, all he wanted to do was run away. No matter how cowardly it looked, his own life must be more precious. He must retreat and wait for the hour when his power would return to him and the seal would be complete, to attack and destroy the settlement at once. Jinchuriki staggered to his feet, trying to think of the least safe course of retreat. The wound Ten had inflicted was tingling. It was possible that her weapon had been smeared with some kind of poison. And there was also the possibility that a couple of his ribs had been mercilessly broken. Fool, what a fool he was to attack the Hokage in such a state. Where was his brain? Why didn't Kurama stop him? How could he stop him in his condition? All he wanted was revenge, and now that revenge was about to turn into a massacre. And Kurama had stopped talking. Couldn't he give any good advice? He couldn't talk to his Biju in front of Tsunade. No, Naruto wasn't going to give himself away that much. And the Hokage was already preparing to strike again. Her hands were folded into seals, and the technique she was about to use clearly didn't bode well. Who are you? For the first time since her appearance, the stern woman spoke. And her voice wasn't friendly and affectionate, there was an undercurrent of threat and danger in it. Oh yes, Naruto could sense the danger emanating from her. But neither was Uzumaki going to answer her question. His gaze slid towards the hole in the wall, but he wouldn't have time to get to it as this lady would beat him to it. He could try a seal to transport himself to another place, but the power was too little for her. Still, the couple minutes of respite she gave him was enough to come up with some semblance of an escape. The time will come, and I will destroy Konoha by killing all the inhabitants of that damn village. Naruto promised and threw a small ball under his feet, which, upon contact with the floor, opened up and released a gray cloud of smoke, from which Uzumaki was transported. When he found himself in the middle of the street near the hospital and heard the shrieks of passers-by, he hastily used the seal again and found himself in the park. He hadn't intended to move to this place at all, it was just the first thing that came to mind. And the only place that came to his mind was the one place he kept seeing Hyuga near. And this time, it didn't go away. Hinata was sitting on a bench, holding her knees to her chest. Her gaze was detached and pensive, seemingly too deep in her own thoughts, so deep that she didn't immediately notice his presence. It took a couple of seconds for the girl to sense his presence, and when she raised her beautiful eyes to him, she froze, even stopped breathing. The kunoichi was so stunned that for a couple of seconds she lost both the power of speech and the ability to control her own body. She jumped to her feet and stood, ready to either attack or defend herself at any moment. Her gaze became determined. Naruto just couldn't see her as an enemy, couldn't look into those eyes and think about having to kill her. Even Kyuubi sensed his tension and, realizing what was wrong, rebelled in his cage. He needed that girl alive. Why isn't Naruto running away? Why is he standing still? What's he waiting for? Is he planning to kill her? Don't you dare! Kurama growled angrily, his roar ringing in his ears. Naruto bent in half, grabbing his ears. That damn fox had lost his mind. He would have just sat there quietly like before, but why did he wake up now? And why the hell is he so loud? Did he know how to do that before? I'm not going to do anything to her, he exclaimed, calming the angry Biju. And then, straightening up, He looked at Hinata and said in a calm voice, "I'm not going to kill you, you're not my enemy." Hyuga was confused, but continued to stand in a stance. She couldn't believe this unknown man. His clothes were dusty and tattered, a deep cut on his shoulder, and his face was hidden by a mask with a fox pattern on it. Neji had told her about this man. He was the one who had destroyed the school, as well as injured Kiba and Ino and supposedly killed them afterward. The man that promised to destroy Konoha. How can she believe his words? She's part of Konoha too, after all. No matter what he decided, Hyuga considered him her enemy because he killed her loved ones. She couldn't forgive him for that. He must surely pay the price. Who are you and what do you want? Her voice trembled as she felt tears of resentment welling up in her eyes and a lump rising in her throat. It was you. The one who killed Kiba and Ino. Uzumaki could have said nothing, could have kept silent and just disappeared. He didn't want her to know that he was responsible for the deaths of her loved ones, nor did he want her to suffer for those people. Why did she care about them so much? He wanted her to take his side and hate them all too. Couldn't she do that? If he told her everything, would she understand him? Would she accept him? Is it worth trying or is it a fool's errand? What should he do? He hesitated. It was as if she were betraying him now, betraying the faith he had placed in her. He had thought her better than the others, had decided to keep her alive. Why does she look at him as an enemy? Why doesn't she thank him for killing those worms? Are they more precious to her than he is? That thought pissed Naruto off. Pissed off so badly that the tip of his katana glinted in his hands. For some reason, the thought lodged itself in his mind like a bright and powerful flash that eclipsed all other rational thought. She should be punished, shouldn't she? Why shouldn't she suffer as well? Could she know true pain? Could she feel true loneliness? A miserable pretender. She has betrayed his trust and betrayed him. She's just like them. So why shouldn't she suffer? Why shouldn't she know the terrifying power of true pain? Let it crush her, tear her apart. Then he would see her climb out of the pit into which he was about to throw her. See how she wants to live when her honor and dignity have been destroyed, when people are whispering behind her back. Let her know a little of the power of his pain. You make me sad, Hinata. Naruto stepped toward her, and the next minute he was behind her back, one arm around her waist and the other around her slender hand. She trembled in his arms, and he whispered softly in her delicate ear, "I thought to have mercy on you, I thought you were better than others. But how are you better? And since you have fallen in my eyes, I want you to fall in theirs." The girl tried to break free, but as it was, the forces were unequal. Uzumaki released her hand and pulled back her hair from her back and drew an invisible mark on her neck, finishing drawing a seal that turned a brown hue. Hyuga felt that the chakra she wanted to use in the technique to protect herself was being held back by something, as if by an invisible barrier. The girl realized she was missing. Without the chakra there wasn't much she could do, even though she had been training, but all of her training was focused on working with chakra. And without it, she remained weak. The shadows were deeper and darker in the evening twilight, lurking as a warning of danger. It was getting colder, and only now did Hyuga notice the change in the weather. She felt it so keenly that she even wondered why she cared more at the moment. Naruto shoved her and she fell to the ground, palms resting on the cold ground. He tore at her shoulder, turning her over with force and looking into Hyuga's face. She hadn't felt the fear yet, she hadn't realized what he was going to do. That was okay, she'd still have time to be scared. Naruto sat on her stomach and deftly wrapped his arms over her head. Hinata continued to be in a trance, the stupor persisting, and there was a certain detachment in her gaze. This amused Naruto. After all he had done. Taking out his katana, he brought it over the girl, right over her heart. Naruto would be merciful to her, she had suffered enough and redeemed herself, it would be possible to grant her blissful freedom. May she find peace and tranquility. That will be his greatest gift. Perhaps her death would bring him pleasure. No. Kurama howled ringingly in his head, and as the blond man's hands were already descending over the kunoichi's body, he jerked and the sharp blade plunged right under her heart, piercing the soft flesh. Hyuga exhaled hoarsely, wincing in pain. Naruto realized that it was Kyubi who had taken advantage of his body for a moment. And the fox's vicious growl sounded threatening. Just try to kill her, Naruto, and I'll destroy you now while you're so weak. Leave her alone. Have it your way, the Jinchuriki spat out venomously, getting to his feet. If you want the damn girl alive, be my guest. But if I catch her again, I'll kill her. We'll see, the fox hissed in response. Naruto adjusted his clothes one more time, looking at Hinata lying at his feet and, satisfied with himself, dissolved. If she was found, she would be saved, but if there were no bystanders around, she would die. Naruto disappeared. But he didn't go back to the apartment. Not now, it was too dangerous. It was time to leave the village. Kurama was silent, though Naruto could sense his anger. It was no big deal, they weren't going to fight over some girl. And even if they did, he could always rein in his biju. Chapter 8-9. Under the mask. The cold enveloped him, stiffening his movements, penetrating deep into his body, freezing his blood and covering his organs with a light layer of frost. It seemed so to him, because every breath he took was disgusting, as if it were taking his life. Breathing, hoarse and desperate, filled the silence of the dilapidated building. He hadn't realized he'd gotten this bad. The poison in his wound had had a stronger effect than Naruto had originally thought, and now, curled up in a seizure, he couldn't help himself. Kurama was deaf and silent to his suffering, as if he didn't even notice, or perhaps he was almost dying from the pain himself. Pain, how hellish that pain was. It obscured his mind, went through his exposed nerves, and simply drove him mad. Lying on the floor, he convulsed. And when the pain subsided, he just lay there, staring blankly before him. His arms twisted, his joints ached, and his heart pounded as if a sharp needle were sticking into it. It was incredible to bear, and he didn't know why he was still alive. There were no thoughts in his head at all, the pain had displaced them and pulsed through his mind. Everything was no longer important, he had simply lost faith, lost control of his body and the seal. It was not vengeance he needed, nor peace of mind, nor strength, but death that was relief and salvation. And he looked forward to the moment when it would come. It seemed to Uzumaki that time had turned into eternity, that there was no end to it, and now he would endure this pain for life. This unbearable and poisonous pain. Death was better. Why doesn't the long-awaited and desired end come? I don't care about anything, I don't care about anyone. Naruto could feel his body disintegrating. If he were mechanical, he would probably feel his body disintegrating into tiny screws and bolts. But he was flesh and blood and had to endure this pain, feel it with his whole body and have no way to extinguish it. A faceless existence filled with deafening despair and an incredible thirst for death. The seal was killing him, sucking the life out of him, blackening his soul, and now his last moments were passing so pitifully and insignificantly. Kyubi was right, he had spoken of this moment. About the moment when one must show neither fortitude nor willpower, but patience. Endless and empty patience. Naruto didn't have it, he had never been able to control his outbursts of rage and extinguish them. He never knew how to lay low and wait for the right moment. He acted directly and immediately. He was rushed and hurried, as if his life could run away and he would get nothing. He was dying. Uzumaki felt it and just longed for that blissful moment to come. Naruto, Baketsun's voice came through his head, barely audible, as if the fox was speaking on his last breath. How are you feeling? Uzumaki wanted to answer. He would have screamed in a fit of rage. He would have torn his vocal cords, but his lips moved and no sound could come out of him. He tried aimlessly and nowhere to express his thought, which had become a phrase that swung around in his head like a pendulum, kept him awake, and was his only salvation. His lips silently uttered, "I want to die." That was all he could think of, no other thought arose in his mind. Only this one, seemingly so blissful and so appealing. Kurama couldn't hear Naruto, but he felt, knew and sensed that his Jinchuriki was dying. Realized, too, that he was dying with him. It would be the best thing to disappear them both, to let that stupid boy die. It was such a tempting thought that Kyubi no Yoko was ready to die himself. But he was also thinking about the girl, that sweet, meek and so kind. Maybe he was dying too soon, maybe they really should destroy the damn village, maybe they really could break the seal. But Kurama also knew what would become of him if the seal obeyed Uzumaki. He had gone through that with Mito, who had changed dramatically and drastically. Then his existence would become a nightmare. This seal changes people, affects their minds, changes their character, habits and disposition. They are too weak to resist it. Their souls are blackened, covered with dust and dirt. Isn't it better to let them die? And then the enchanting freedom would await them both. But there was another option, quite risky, though in this situation any risk would be justified. He should only try and be patient. Whether he would have the patience or not, Kurama didn't know. Nor did he know what Naruto would do, because there would be no way for him to control this child. The bond between them would become so thin that Kurama wouldn't even be able to intervene. And yet, it was worth a try. The first thing Naruto felt was that the pain was beginning to recede, just as the waves receded from the shore, leaving behind wet sand, so the pain was leaving behind an unpleasant sensation. Uzumaki was able to breathe normally, the cold air filling his lungs. Uzumaki was even able to sit up, though his body was aching. The pain receded, and then strength began to build up in him. He felt it pouring into him like wine filling an empty glass. This wonderful feeling was inimitable and unforgettable. Naruto laughed, unable to contain his emotions. Unbridled joy was filling him. He had done it. Was he really able to break the seal? Uzumaki didn't feel invincible, he felt omnipotent and no enemy could overpower him. Thoughts of death now seemed insignificant and pathetic to him. How could he have thought of such a thing before? Now was the time for revenge. Now he was ready to do his duty. They would all pay, every last one of them. Kurama, the Jinchuriki said to his Biju, his voice full of majesty and triumph, we did it. But the fox demon didn't answer, Naruto didn't even feel his presence. He tried to enter his subconscious, but something blocked his attempt. This did not please Uzumaki. What had become of Kyubi? Was he alive? Or is he dead? Perhaps because of the seal, they couldn't contact each other yet. Perhaps it would take time. Naruto was ready to give Kurama a well-deserved rest, and in the meantime he would tear the damn village apart. Naruto stood up, he didn't even notice the pain in his body. His thoughts were preoccupied with other things right now. Uzumaki was going to live up to his image from now on. Changing into a black cloak and pulling on a vengeance mask with a fox pattern, Naruto allowed himself to laugh again. The power was intoxicating his mind. Now he wanted to kill them all. The seal required little or no strength now, and Naruto carried himself effortlessly to the gates of the village. He had once left through them with resentment and anger in his heart, and now he had returned to return the pain and fear they had subjected him to. He gave them a week to rest. Gave them a week to enjoy life one last time, and now their lives belonged to him. Naruto would have no mercy on them. Uzumaki walked through the main gate, and before the patrolman could see him, he folded one seal and made them drop dead. The blood simply froze in their veins, and the heart, no longer able to race white blood cells and platelets through their veins, was stopped. And wow, he had barely used chakra, when at any other time the technique could have taken a significant amount of his power. How easy it was to kill them now. But before his performance, Uzumaki paid a visit to his old apartment, from where he took Ino's heart, which was waiting for him in the refrigerator. It was great that it hadn't started to rot yet, otherwise the performance wouldn't have been as fun. Clutching the cold organ in his hands, Naruto felt an unbelievable exhilaration wash over him. He couldn't wait to give them all a thrashing. He would play with each of his victims for sure. The blonde looked around his room with a leisurely glance. How much he had been bound to this place, what he had not experienced here, what misery and misfortune had not befallen him. So many years of loneliness, coldness, pain, resentment, anger, irritation, fear, tears, and despair. If they had only known the state to which they had reduced him, would they have been the least bit kind to him? If they shunned and ignored him, it could be tolerated, but some of the residents crossed the line and did things that Naruto couldn't forgive them for anything. The physical pain was not worth it compared to the mental torment. Then, when he was shattered and panic-stricken, unable to find a reasonable response to what was happening, Kurama came to the rescue. To some extent, Uzumaki became dependent on the fox, who helped him regain his peace of mind, clarified everything that was happening to him, and guided him to the right path. If it wasn't for Kurama, Naruto would have completely despaired. Jinchuriki was grateful for everything to his Biju, but he would never admit it, much less speak words of gratitude into the nine-tailed man's face. That was what his heart was melting. But at the same time Kyuubi was the cause of his misfortune. Without that monster in him, Uzumaki's life would have turned out very differently. The villagers would have been kinder and gentler to him, perhaps they would have been more caring, gentle and patronizing. But because he was a Jinchuriki, he was considered cursed. And that curse had been brought upon him by his own father. The blond man gritted his teeth, rage rising in waves, taking over his mind, awakening his usual impatience and thirst for vengeance. This apartment reminded him of his past life, a life he had successfully buried. And only Hyuga remembered him. Clung to him like a lifeline. If only she knew the truth, she would hate him with all her heart. On the one hand, he wanted to see her eyes fade, to see her despair and pain overwhelm her. But at the same time it was terrible to lose the only person who believed in the past and the present you. By losing her, wouldn't he sever all the threads of the past? Then he'd be nothing. Someone who doesn't exist. Would he be willing to do that? Naruto left his room with a bad feeling and he felt uneasy. Uzumaki headed for the hospital now, but after changing his mind, he stopped. Who would he start with? Though his soul longed for Hinata, but she wasn't his target right now, after all. He was already plotting Shikamaru's death. Better to get rid of him. Closing his eyes, Uzumaki tried to feel the genius of Konoha. At first he thought that he couldn't do it, that the idea was ridiculous, but then an inexplicable feeling began to awaken in him. He was able to determine the direction and distance the shinobi was from him. He could just feel his presence. The smirk never left the blonde's lips. Now the fun was just beginning. In a matter of seconds, Naruto formed a seal that he had never used before, but which he had learned months ago, and felt that he was surrounded by an invisible barrier that could not be seen by the human eye, animal eye, or any other living creature. Uzumaki moved towards Shikamaru. More specifically, to where he was. Naruto hadn't expected to find himself in a graveyard. The moon shone over Konoha was not bright, having a certain yellow tint, and so the light semi-darkness hid figures and shapes in its shadows, giving them blurred outlines. There was no wind, so silence reigned. The silence was so strong that it completely penetrated the soul. Uzumaki stood puzzled for a few moments. An incomprehensible feeling swept over him. His gaze drifted towards the gravestone that had Yamanaka's name engraved on it. He hadn't even expected to be near his victim's grave. Naruto saw Shikamaru from the back. His high ponytail was a permanent hairstyle, only this time the guy was wearing a Jonin outfit. It wasn't surprising, with powers like his. Still, Naruto cautiously walked around him to see his face, how much he had changed over the years. Naruto walked behind Ino's grave, standing behind the headstone and gripping the cold marble with his fingers. He stared into the face of a guy he'd studied with as a kid, who was incredibly smart and who probably wanted to straighten out his girlfriend's killer. He wondered if they were close or just teammates. Shikamaru raised his face to the sky, his gaze sliding lazily across the dim stars. His thoughts were far away from here. Before the shinobi noticed or even sensed the presence of the intruder, Uzumaki leaned over the tombstone and placed the cold heart he had been clutching in his hand on the ground. Straightening up, he looked at Naru carefully. As if sensing something wrong, he looked down and his face turned incredibly pale, his pupils dilated with excitement and indignation, but Shikamaru remained calm. He continued to stand and stare at his heart, having already realized everything, and his words put Uzumaki in a stupor. "Show yourself, Naruto." Uzumaki removed his invisibility technique and appeared in a black cloak and with his face hidden. He was excited. Of all the possible people who could figure out his identity, the closest was Hinata, and that she was immediately frightened by her own clue. Kurama had to try hard not to be recognized as himself. Is Kurama dead, and with him his technique? Then how was Shikamaru able to understand? There was a confidence and determination in the shinobi's voice that was impossible to doubt. "How did you understand?" Uzumaki asked in a quiet and dry voice. He wasn't going to deny the truth, and yet, he wondered where he'd gotten it wrong. Shikamaru drilled him with a silent stare for a couple minutes. Naruto could feel the contempt and hatred in his gaze. It was a look he was very familiar with. The Jonin had every reason to hate like he did, so Naruto thought. Everything in this world deserved to be hated, anything that had the potential to hurt, and anything could hurt. I've been trying to figure out who this man hiding his face under a fox mask is, who this stranger is who has decided to take revenge on Konoha for who knows what, Nara said in a calm voice. The first attack was on the school, perhaps, I thought at first, the man who set the fire was somehow connected to the school. Surely he was a student. And that thought later proved to be correct and prompted my next thoughts. Kiba and Ino were the first to be wounded, but the fact that the enemy didn't attack those who were nearby, but attacked only those two, suggested that the victims had some connection, direct or indirect, to the culprit. As it turned out, my assumption was a bit false. As the attacker was aiming to kill Inuzuka, I realized that Kiba was his original target. He was supposed to die immediately, wasn't he? And Ino was just an accident. Naruto enjoyed listening to his musings. Shikamaru knew how to charm with his logical talents. He certainly wouldn't have been able to guess the culprit on his own. I was able to talk to Kiba before you killed him, and I did it with obvious haste, probably to cover my tracks. Neji interfered with you first, and then Ino. Kiba said you called him by his first name, which led me to conclude that you two knew each other and were probably in the same class, but I'd always put off the idea that you were a student. That was one possibility, and it wasn't as likely as the others. Nara didn't change his face, his voice still steady. At first I assumed that the one who attacked Konoha had been present at the exams a couple of times and could have seen the village, known the location of the school, and possibly had a grudge against Kiba. Because the year before last, Inuzuka had a fight with one shinobi from Whirlpool. He was originally my suspect, and why would he want to destroy all of Konoha? Killing one Inuzuka would have been enough. That's what I thought at the time of Kiba's funeral. Naruto really regretted that Shikamaru wasn't his accomplice. With brains like that they would have destroyed the damn village in a matter of days without his immense power. But Uzumaki only had Kurama. But Ino's death. His voice shook, it hurt him to talk about it. Her death made it clear that it was someone else. You only killed her because it was easy to do. After that, there was the attack on the Hokage building. Tenten's death was another blow. Then you mentioned again that you were going to destroy Konoha, and in the battle with Tsunade you reminded her of that. That phrase was key. You weren't seeking revenge on someone, you were going to destroy everyone, blaming everyone for your misfortunes. So you had a grudge against the village. I admit that for a while I thought that under the mask was the face of Uchiha Sasuke. But would Sasuke hide? No, if he came to destroy Konoha, he wouldn't hide, and he wouldn't hesitate either. Yeah, Sasuke. Of the two of them, Naruto was the only one who made his revenge a reality. Hinata came to me afterward. Naruto's mind flipped at the mention of the kunoichi, but Shikamaru continued, she told me everything. I know it took a lot of effort on her part, the Hyugas kept the incident a secret, but still, you made her life a living hell. You made the one who believed in you suffer. But you didn't kill her, you weren't even going to. At the mention of Hinata, everything inside trembled. He should have killed her because she was causing that nasty weakness in him. It was like she was becoming a barrier to his revenge. It's been quiet for a week, not a word from you. You're weak, at least you were, and you had no strength, and Tsunade's beating made you realize that. Shikamaru watched his face intently. And then I focused on your mask. Why a fox? Why not a wolf, not an owl, not a raccoon, but a fox? Perhaps it has some special meaning, and I tried to remember. Someone who had been in the same class as Kiba and me, someone who might have some connection to Konoha and who might have a grudge against the village. And then it came to me, a nine-tailed fox demon, you're his Jinchuriki, aren't you? Admittedly, that information was worth the effort. And it all made sense. Your death was fake, so many years had passed since you had secretly left the village, and most likely you had been learning various techniques and accumulating power during that time. Your return to Konoha was due to the first attack. That was just the beginning of the show. Naruto couldn't help but admire Shikamaru. It was as if he had been by Uzumaki's side the whole time. Kiba's death was necessary because you lost to him in the exam and you needed a rematch. I'm surprised Sakura's still alive. But I guess you left her for later. You needed to kill Kiba as a witness and to finish the job. You were very weak, so you killed Ino at a time when all the shinobi would be busy with the funeral. The attack on the Hokage's residence was insane, perhaps an outburst of rage or spite. Even 1010 was beyond you then, you had to deal with her, and you didn't have the strength to deal with the Hokage, at least not now. Hinata was probably an accident, she didn't even know about the attack at the time. You could have killed her right away, but considering that she was in love with you and had believed in you all her life, she was the only person you cared about, so you took pity on her, even though you used her. She said that you were disappointed in her, that you wanted her to fall in the eyes of others. In other words, you wanted her to go through the same thing you went through, or at least part of it, so that you would be the only person who would care about her. I never expected this from you, Naruto. And now you want revenge like Sasuke. You even have similar destinies, which is why you were friends even though you pretended to be rivals. You had too much in common. Naruto was shocked at such candor. There were gaps in Shikamaru's speech and sometimes his guesses weren't quite right, but still he was able to piece together a complete picture and even unravel it. That deserved admiration and respect. And now came Nara's death. Uzumaki pulled out his katana and scrutinized his opponent. You must die too. The next second he was in front of Shikamaru's face and stabbed him with the sharp weapon. Shikamaru grabbed his shoulder, digging his fingers in and unnoticed, leaving a small mark on the blonde's neck. Naruto pushed him away and the man took a couple steps away and stumbled, falling, holding onto the wound. One thing was done, now it was time to visit Sakura. She had waited too long for him. That was okay, now it was her turn. Tracking Haruno was much more difficult. Naruto spent some time searching pointlessly until he realized that the kunoichi was not in the village. Apparently, she had gone on a mission. Well, she was unbelievably lucky, but there were others he was going to kill, after all. Uzumaki had left the death of the Goem and the death of Kakashi for last. Now it was the turn of the man Naruto had been drawn to since childhood. Iruka. How long it had been since he had seen him. At this time, he was most likely at his home. Uzumaki headed towards his former teacher's house. Stopping in front of the door, Naruto froze excitedly and then knocked. A couple minutes of waiting and the door opened. A russet-haired man appeared on the doorstep, his hair loose and scattered across his shoulders. He froze in surprise, his hand reaching back, perhaps in an attempt to find some kind of sharp weapon. His eyes reflected excitement and fear. And now it's your turn, Iruka-sensei, and the sharp blade of the kunai traveled down his throat, slicing through his windpipe. The man clutched at the wound, settling to his knees, gurgling sounds coming from his mouth, blood flowing from the wound and from his mouth, foaming at the corners of his lips. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish on dry land trying to adjust and take in a breath of air. His hands, all bloody, clenched on the cut, and then he fell face forward dead. Uzumaki stood over the corpse for a couple minutes, finding himself brooding. Who would he kill now? Whose turn had come to die? For some reason he felt like seeing Hinata right now. Shikamaru had said that he had made her life a living hell. Now she was suffering, now she had to understand and accept him. He didn't understand whether he needed her or not. Should he try to lure the girl to his side or should he kill her? She must be in the Hyuga mansion now, probably in a warm bed, dreaming sweet dreams. Well, he would disturb her dreams. Naruto hadn't made enough noise to alarm the entire village yet, and perhaps the corpses at the main gate had been discovered. Still, it would be worth a try to find her in her room. And if she wasn't ready for him, he would kill her. Uzumaki had never been to the Hyuga house, he even vaguely knew where they were, so he didn't find the mansion he wanted the first time. After standing in front of the high fence for a couple minutes, he swung over it and stalked along, staying in the shadows. A mansion like this must have good security. Therefore, it would be easier to kill the patrolling guards before they made a fuss. Noticing the location of the 7 ninjas, Naruto silently got near the first one, behind his back so that he wouldn't see and, with his palm gagging him, slashed his throat with a kunai, throwing the corpse under his feet. The second and third he launched senbons that hit him in the head, ensuring instant death. The fourth had his neck snapped, and on the fifth, sixth, and seventh he used the same technique he used on the shinobi guarding the village gates. They too fell dead with a thud. Now it was worth it to sneak into the house and find the girl. Entering the hallway, and from it following the narrow corridor, Naruto moved straight ahead, cautiously peering into the rooms he found. To his surprise, there was almost no one in the room, just two shinobi, which he dealt with quickly enough. Opening one of the doors, he just felt like it was the one he was looking for. Carefully slipping into the dark room and closing the door behind him, Uzumaki moved towards the bed that someone was sleeping on. Naruto froze over the sleeping person and then carefully pulled back the blanket, sliding his gaze over the body. Hyuga, as if sensing something through the dream, shuddered and squirmed. Naruto grinned. She fixed her startled gaze on her night visitor and her lips stretched in a mute scream. She immediately recoiled, sitting up and pushing herself back against the wall, the thin strap slipping off her right shoulder. Her loose and tangled hair, the blush on her cheeks, and the frightened look in her eyes were incredibly seductive. Naruto felt arousal awaken in him. This was his Hinata. No, how could he kill her? After all, her suffering brought him such pleasure. Here we meet again, Hinata, Uzumaki grinned, reaching out to her. Hinata slapped his hand, not wanting that touch. There was indeed pain in her gaze. Well, her own clan considered her tainted. A disgraced clan heiress, stripped of her honor, what could be worse? What do you want? Her voice trembled with excitement. She didn't make a fuss because she was afraid he might kill people from her clan. She didn't want that, and she only hoped he had gotten into the mansion unnoticed, without touching anyone. Their lives were important to her. Too important, more important than her own life. I came for you, Uzumaki replied, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward him. Hyuga tried to resist at first, but their strength was not so equal. He was stronger again and she just couldn't disobey him. He dragged her out into the hallway and then outside. Hyuga felt the coldness of the ground with her bare feet, small pebbles and twigs crashing into her skin. She was frightened, not knowing what she should do in this situation. Her quick glance slid over the dead shinobi and her heart clenched painfully. Naruto froze and Hinata didn't immediately realize the reason for their stopping. She looked behind his back and sighed nervously. Uzumaki's fingers dug harder into her wrist. She herself couldn't contain her own exclamation of joy. She was incredibly happy to see this man. Neji, Uzumaki spat out venomously, I'm not interested in you at all. Let me pass and you'll have time to live a little longer. Let Hinata-sama go, Hyuga said firmly. Naruto realized that he would not give in and pushed Hinata away from him. The girl, unable to stand on trembling legs, fell to the ground. Hinata was excited and scared. She wanted her cousin to kill this man, but at the same time, she feared for Neji's life because she sensed strength in Uzumaki. That hadn't been the case last time. And it would be completely different now. Ni-san, the girl exhaled intermittently and pressed her hands to her mouth. She felt like she was about to burst into tears. She didn't want to interfere or distract and wanted to believe in her relative's victory. His life she treasured greatly. Neji got into a stance, ready to attack. Naruto was ready to fight to the death as well. Uzumaki was the first to attack, aiming 3 kunai at his opponent. Neji easily deflected them and delivered a precise blow to his shoulder, the next to his chest and right thigh. The places where the blows were aimed recoiled in unpleasant pain. Naruto struck again, this time with his katana, grazing the shoulder blades on his back. His attack was aimless, and he hadn't planned on hitting his opponent at all, but he was awfully glad that he was able to do some damage. Hinata sat back and watched their ruthless grip. Hyuga was the only witness, and she realized there was nothing she could do. Their battle was short-lived, the winner was already known to Hinata beforehand, but she refused to believe it. Blind hope continued to live in her heart. She was ready to pray to all the gods that her brother, if not one, at least stayed alive. But it was all to no avail. Neji was inferior in strength to Naruto, and when Uzumaki threw the final blow, striking his enemy in the chest, Hinata couldn't hold back the cry of despair that escaped her lips and echoed through Konoha. That's what it seemed to her. As her brother's lifeless body fell to the ground, Hyuga threw herself at him, now unable to hold back the sobs that choked her. Hinata was terrified, fear, pain, despair, and hope still raging in her heart. She cradled Neji's head against her chest, gazing into his dead eyes. His body was still warm, retaining the remnants of life. He had been with her, she had touched him, but he was already dead, there was no bringing him back now. Hinata gasped in sobs, short of air, she couldn't breathe in or out. Her brother had been killed. She refused to believe that he was dead. No, 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 it just couldn't be. How could it be? Why had it all happened right in front of her eyes? Why did fate do such a cruel thing? He's dead, Uzumaki approached from the back. He watched as her frail shoulders shook, she trembled in her silent sobs that choked her. It was as if Hinata didn't hear him, she had even forgotten that he was standing next to her and that her life was now in his hands. It had lost its meaning, life itself seemed horrible to her, and if he was going to kill her then she was willing to accept that death. Naruto grabbed her shoulder, bringing her to her feet, but Hyuga's legs were trembling, she was ready to fall at any moment, tears were streaming down her cheeks, her lips were trembling, the only thought in her head was, Neji is dead. It seemed nothing could be more horrible in this life. She had seen the death of a loved one and now she would never forget. Naruto turned her to face him, digging his fingers into her shoulders, clearly leaving bruises on her delicate skin. It was as if Hinata didn't notice him, her gaze was directed through him, she stared and trembled. In front of her eyes was the dead face of the man she loved. Uzumaki shook her as if trying to bring her to her senses and cried out loudly. Do you understand now? I will kill them all, every single one of them. And, Hinata, his voice became quieter, will you come with me? Hyuga blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected to hear such a thing. She didn't quite know if she'd heard it right. Go. Where? Why? With him. No. She exclaimed furiously. No, not this. How could she accept this man? A murderer. Her heart screamed. Naruto was furious. How dare she refuse him? Who the hell was she? He would not be kind to her now. Let that thing die. He grabbed her by the throat, squeezing her fingers and preventing oxygen from entering her lungs. Hinata twitched, he lifted her up, and she slid toe to toe on the ground, her fingers clawing into Uzumaki's palm. She gasped, no, she wasn't ready to die after all. He brought her face closer to his so he could better see the life drain from her eyes. Hyuga twitched harder, her palm went to his face, grabbed the edge of the mask and pulled it off his face. From what she saw, the porcelain object fell out of her hands and fell to the ground, shattering. Naruto released her out of surprise and pulled away. The girl fell to the ground, grabbing her throat and trying to catch her breath. She stared at the man who had brought her so much grief, the man she had ripped the mask off of. The guy's face had nice features, his eyes were blue, his hair blonde. All so familiar, all so beloved, only one name escaped her lips and Hinata was sure it was him. Naruto. Uzumaki flinched in surprise. The porcelain mask was shattered, his face revealed, and hearing his name from her lips, he felt himself panic. She couldn't recognize him. No, he had introduced himself to her by another name. So why was that? He was as confused as she was. It wasn't supposed to be like this. No, it wasn't. She wasn't supposed to see his face, not supposed to call him by name. He backed away again, panic rising in him. How to be? What to do now? You're Menma, aren't you? Her voice sounded confident. She rose to her feet, but that's not your name. Your name is Naruto. Why, Naruto? The condemnation in her voice was painful, her gaze reproachful. She couldn't forgive him for all of this. And he couldn't explain it to her, he just couldn't find the right words. How to tell her? Would she understand him? Would she accept him? He stepped back again. No, no, this is all wrong. Why does she have this effect on him? Why does she make him feel guilty of something terrible? It's justice, great justice. You killed them all. Why? What did they do, Naruto? She stepped toward him, her movements cautious, as if she were trying to approach a frightened and feral kitten. Naruto clutched his head. There was a black hole in his soul that sucked him in. No. He exclaimed in desperation. No, stay away. You don't understand, you just don't understand. Uzumaki paced from side to side. He didn't know what to do, how to act, what to say. Why? Why is she acting like this? Why doesn't she hate, or fear, or curse, but tries to be affectionate and gentle? Why? It's unbearable, just unbearable. Naruto, Hyuga reached out her hand as if wanting to touch him. No, Uzumaki exclaimed hysterically and ran away. Run, run, as far away as possible. Why was Kurama sleeping? Where the hell is he? He should be there, he had to be. Naruto didn't know what he would do without him. Running away from Hinata, away from the village, back into the dark forest where the shadows of the trees could shelter him, hide him from Hyuga's eyes. He ran as far as he could, his soul darkening, his hair turning black and his eyes from blue to a brown color, close to black. As far as he could, panting and stumbling. Hinata seemed like a light to him, a saving light, blinding and warm. And he wanted to go into the darkness, into the gloom. Where her warmth couldn't reach him. Kurama, where are you? Kurama, can you hear me? His voice seemed to be both a loud scream and at the same time, a quiet whisper. He was gripped by panic and fear, he could feel himself changing. It was as if something inside him was dying, crumbling to ashes. Naruto ran, running forward and afraid to look back for fear of seeing Hinata behind him. No, he couldn't stand having her around. Now, more than ever in his life, he missed Kurama. Kyuubi to help him deal with this feeling. An incomprehensible excitement swept over him. He was afraid, he was trembling, he was ready to cower in a corner and roar. The darkness was overtaking him, the darkness was taking over his soul. Chapter 10. The Last Fight. The two of them were alone, a thick gloom surrounding them, not allowing light to penetrate the circle. Behind this shroud of blackness was hidden the rest of the world. There reigned death and life, their people loved, killed, died, were born, were afraid. Their life was in full swing, but here, outside the circle, time had no power over them. Here they were left to their own devices, and only here did they do true justice. Naruto was surprised, incredibly surprised. Opposite him was himself, but unlike himself, the doppelganger had black hair and black eyes, otherwise he was identical to him, and it was as if they were blood brothers. But Naruto didn't know the one who stood across from him, but it was as if he found a vague familiarity in him. The black-haired man smiled and that smile made him feel uneasy. He spoke and his voice was identical to Naruto's. Well, hello Naruto, here we are face to face, now there are no barriers between us and we can talk to you in peace, if you have the patience of course. Uzumaki clenched his fists. How could this person, this creature, or in general, perhaps a shadow of a technique, speak to him like that? What was it and who did it think it was? A pathetic creature. Still, Uzumaki realized that he had to be careful and try to get the truth out of this creature. Who are you? The blonde exclaimed loudly, trying to suppress the fear rising in him. Muffle it, dull it, and finally drive it out of him. The black-haired copy laughed. Her laugh sounded sinister, and the look it bestowed upon Uzumaki was full of arrogance. The black-haired man ran a hand through his hair, the gesture reminded Naruto of his own, wanting to do the same, but the blonde held back. He tried to analyze and understand how he had gotten here and who this stranger could be. He was also trying to understand his own feelings. What did he feel for this copy? You don't recognize me, Naruto. The copy arched an eyebrow in surprise. We've existed side by side in your body for so many years, and you don't even recognize me. I look much different now than you're used to seeing me, but I'm an integral part of you. Your continuation, your end. The black-haired Naruto's words made no sense at all. Side by side. Is that really? Kurama. Naruto doubtfully spoke his thought aloud. The black-haired guy laughed, bending in half as if Uzumaki had said something incredibly stupid. But the only person Naruto could think of was Kyuubi. Was there anyone else who could stay by his side for a long time? I am not a flesh and blood creature. The black-haired man straightened up, his gaze hardening. I am a part of you, Naruto, I am your dark side. All your flaws, all your fears, your anger, your resentment, your bitterness, your hatred, your despair, all of that is me. I am you, and I bear the same name as you, I am Uzumaki Naruto. And I wouldn't have my own form, my own body, my own voice, if it weren't for this seal. That fox told you about the moment when you'd be alone and when he couldn't help you, didn't he? You thought that this moment had already passed, but then you had that cunning fox with you, but you were wrong, this moment has just come. Now and only now your future destiny is decided. Each person is initially born with a light aura, light ambitions and desires, goodness, compassion, humanity, care, tenderness, caress, love. Lives in everyone. But along with this there are bad tendencies in him, envy, regret, betrayal, malice, hatred, backbiting, slander, arrogance, flattery. And this technique divides a person into two parts, good and bad, to fill them both with the original natural power. And the moment these two powers merge, there is a struggle in the man himself. If you lose to me, you die, if I lose to you, you get the power and regain control of your body. But here's the problem, Kurama isn't around and you'll have to fight me one-on-one. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Uzumaki tried to pull himself together. It looked like he had reached the last stage of the seal, and he had thought he had completed it, but it turned out that the best part was left for later. QB wasn't around, but that was okay. Couldn't he do it without the fox? Defeat his other side. That would be a piece of cake. He was already ready for battle, trying to calculate plans of action and choose the best one. He didn't have much left to do. Now he would not back down, and if necessary, he would sink his teeth and nails into the throat of his opponent, just to save his own life. Don't underestimate him. Naruto looked at his copy carefully. She was incredibly relaxed, as if she wasn't preparing for battle, or was it just a cover? Was this dark Naruto really messing with him? You're wrong as always. The black-haired man stepped forward and his image became blurred, as if his reflection on the water had caught a ripple, and then took on a completely different shape, with completely different outlines. Now the girl stepped toward him, her delicate hands reaching for him. Gently touching his cheeks, those eyes. Those eyes he wasn't ready to see, just as he wasn't ready for his dark side to be able to change form. We're not going to fight, it's not the battle that decides everything now, it's the feelings that are raging inside you. You don't have to be afraid, everything will definitely be fine, because I'm with you. It was her voice. It was definitely hers. The same intonation, tenderness and caress with which she spoke. It was all familiar and almost real. Uzumaki stood paralyzed for a couple of minutes. There was no way he had expected to see her. No, why had he assumed her image in particular? His heart pounded frantically in his chest, quickening its pace, his knees trembled, and panic overwhelmed him. Naruto pushed the woman's hands away from him and bounced back. This closeness, though not with a real kunoichi, it gave the impression of reality. But she shouldn't be here, should she? Naruto stepped back and felt a cold wind at his back. He turned around, glaring fearfully at the black wall of darkness that seemed incredibly dangerous to him. What lurked within it, he didn't know, but he felt it was worth staying away from. Worry swept over Uzumaki. He felt trapped in a cage, with no possible escape. His gaze drifted back to the girl and his lips spoke dryly. No, you're not Hinata, you just can't be here. The voice was quiet and slightly trembling with excitement. The girl opened her mouth in surprise, as if offended, but then smiled affectionately and stepped towards him. There was kindness in her gaze, the kindness he wanted to receive but was afraid of at the same time. Naruto, don't be afraid of me, I want to help you. She held out her gentle hands to him again. Uzumaki closed his eyes for a moment. He wished he had a katana in his hands, and as if by magic he was clenching the hilt of his weapon in his palm. He smiled. Confidence had returned to him. Uzumaki opened his eyes and stepped towards the girl, thrusting the tip of his katana full length into her. The hyuga in his hands trembled and sank to her knees. Naruto continued to clutch the hilt in his hands and leaned in too, peering into her gentle eyes. Had he won? Was it enough to win? What have you done? Her eyes widened in horror. Naruto, you didn't have to do that. Her slender fingers dug into his shoulders. It's too late now. You'll be alone for the rest of your life. Loneliness will eat you up. In the next minute, Hyuga's appearance dawned again, and a moment later, a complete stranger was looking at him. He hadn't seen her before, but knew, from Kurama's description, who she was. The green eyes looked so loving and caring that his heart snapped in his chest, a faint smile sliding across the woman's lips. The delicate features of her face were vaguely familiar to him, he had seen them before when he looked at his own reflection. The same nose, the curve of her eyebrows, the dimples near her lips. Only her hair, glowing with fire, seemed to be on fire. Naruto reached out, grasping the strands of hair that slipped from his fingers. He'd never hoped to see her, though he'd always dreamed of this meeting. How many times had he imagined this moment? That blissful moment when they could meet, whether in a dream or after death. But they had to meet. Naruto felt large tears slide down his cheeks. He hadn't been prepared for this meeting, he hadn't hoped for it in any way. And now, in this brief and precious moment, they had finally met. Who would have thought it? Honey, you don't have to regret anything. Her voice was a little rougher than he had expected, but it was soft and gentle. What you did was right. Don't regret anything. You've grown big and strong, I'm proud of you. You won this fight, you defeated the darkness in your heart and you can be proud of yourself. I'm sorry I was never there for you. Forgive me for not even helping in the battle. Don't be surprised to see me now, we are on the border between the living and the dead, that's why you can hear my voice and feel my touch. Naruto stood stunned, his knees were shaking, he just couldn't control himself. He couldn't take in what was happening to him normally. Everything was out of bounds. It wasn't what he thought it would be. It wasn't like this at all. And if this was the only moment they were able to meet, he should be incredibly happy, but now she was impaled on a katana, scarlet blood dripping from the corners of her lips. And it was causing his heart to race. And it was causing his heart to ache. Don't cry, her cool fingers touched his cheek, wiping away the tears. Wow, you look just like Minato. I'm sorry for the fate you've suffered. Don't curse your father, he loved you, and if he were still alive, he would still love you. Listen less to the cunning fox and think with your own head, you are smarter and kinder than he is. Learn to forgive and always lend a helping hand to the weak. Make up for all your mistakes and don't hold a grudge against Konoha. Be above these people, don't stoop to their level. You deserve the best, it's a shame I can't give you everything you want. Mother, Uzumaki dropped to his knees and hugged her, he wanted to pull her to him as much as possible, but the katana's hilt was still stuck in her and he had to be careful. There was bitterness and regret in his words, a longing that had built up over the years. Is it really you? Mother. I didn't mean to, I really didn't mean to. I'm sorry. Naruto, her caressing hands burrowed into his hair. I never dreamed that your heart could surrender. You're too young, too stupid and naive. No, it's your heart that's stronger than your mind. It's been years and you still haven't learned how to control your own feelings. Naruto felt something cold touch his face, covering it. He pulled away and could only see through the slits of his eyes. Touching the cold porcelain, he realized it was a mask. He ran his hand over the cold porcelain in surprise, realizing nothing. Not understanding anything at all. What was even going on? Naruto began to look around, but Kushina was no longer there, her sweet image seeming to melt into thin air, forever out of reach. He wanted to howl and scream at the top of his lungs. He rose to his feet. It seemed to him that the dense wall of darkness had come closer and the circle he was in had become smaller. He understood nothing, absolutely nothing. Panic awoke in Uzumaki. He froze in place like a statue and shrank back fearfully. He was under the power of fear that blinded his mind. Uzumaki had lost. Lost in a battle he thought he had come out victorious in. And now it's his end. Had he really lost? He wanted to call out to Kurama, to get him here right now, to give him his power or get him out of this place. The darkness was advancing, surrounding him in a tight ring. There was nothing to fight now. The darkness had taken the meanest way possible, and he himself had opened himself to that darkness, stretched out his arms to it, enclosed it in an embrace, so it had entered him. And now this darkness that had thickened around him was about to engulf him as well. Panic gripped the blonde's body. Naruto looked down at his feet, because he had never done that before, and was surprised to see a mirrored surface near the floor. Why hadn't he noticed it before? Naruto pulled off his fox-shaped mask and the cold porcelain fell from his fingers. What he saw horrified him. He looked at himself, at his black hair, his eyes, his facial features seemed to have gotten rougher, but that wasn't what made him so afraid. His scars seemed to have separated, lengthened, merged together, covering his cheeks. On one side the scar had turned into a hideous burn and was rising upward, almost touching the corner of his eye, on the other into one rough scar, as if his skin had been peeled off there, almost reaching his chin. The sight he saw was what shocked him beyond belief. "No!" Uzumaki shouted with all his might, falling to his knees and pounding the cold floor with his fists as if trying to break the false glass. Darkness, as if sensing his fear, rushed towards him faster. Naruto felt it, and when the darkness overtook him, swallowing him up and taking him forever into a realm where no light could reach, he let out one last scream, filled with blatant terror, but it was as if it couldn't cut through the thick darkness and forever remained unheard. Kurama opened his eyes abruptly, his consciousness touched by Uzumaki's last scream. It sounded so deafeningly loud in his head that his body shook with compassion and fear. Kurama looked up at the blue sky that loomed above him. How long had he been lying here? It seemed that his own soul was aching because the physical pain merged with the mental pain and gave birth to a new kind of pain that couldn't even be described. And how had he endured all this time? He raised his hand in front of him and ineptly clenched his fingers into a fist. He didn't know how to control the human body at all. It seemed small to him, restricting his movements. He tried to sit up, but it took him about 3 minutes, as his first attempts were clearly unsuccessful. Kurama had no idea how to stand on his feet, but it was enough for him to get on all fours, and he crawled to the stream that flowed nearby. Looking into the reflective surface, he couldn't hold back a smile when he saw his face. Black hair and black eyes and no streaks on his cheeks. This face had once belonged to Uzumaki Naruto, of which there was no trace left. Now it was completely his face. Kurama laughed, he was feeling incredibly elated. He had never been so happy in his life. Now he could own his own body. He was now a human being. It was worth the pain. Wow, how amazing this world is and how easily it can be deceived. Now he had to learn how to control his own body, though it probably wasn't that hard, and still, it was worth working on. And then one would have to determine which way Konoha was. Or was, whether Naruto had been able to destroy it or not, and how much time had passed since then. He just knew, that the girl he needed so badly was alive. His lips stretched in a vicious grin. Hinata would surely be his. Never before had Kurama felt so drawn to any living thing. And she had, unknowingly, forced him to do such a terrible job, and now she simply had to belong to him. She has no choice. Goodbye, Uzumaki Naruto, Kurama laughed, his fingers seeming to wipe away the water reflection that had become charged. The end.